Vincent continued to sip his drink. After finishing, he spoke up, "Indeed, my servant." At the ball, the scene looked incredibly magnificent and splendid. Everyone was dressed in outfits that looked very elegant and graceful. Suddenly, a window was smashed by someone and glass shards flew everywhere. This sight caught everyone's attention, making them turn to look. It turned out to be Tolio along with his henchmen, the perpetrators who had broken the window of Enter. He was holding a sword in his hand with a wicked smile on his lips as he looked down at the group below, where the Eren people were standing. Tolio leaped down with the sword in hand. At this moment, everyone was in a panic, fleeing in all directions. Some even yelled loudly, causing the scene to become extremely chaotic. "It's the pirates!" Ah! Tolio acted decisively. He killed one person in just a brief second. The victim hadn't even had time to escape before Tolio sent him to meet death. Gradually, more and more people were killed. He moved swiftly, as fast as a flash of lightning. One guest was even thrown against the chandelier above. Tolio, with a bloodthirsty expression, said to his henchmen, "Kill all those pests, steal their riches, and enjoy the women." Notably, in his other hand, he was holding a woman's severed arm. Hearing the leader say that, Tolio's subordinates became even more ruthless. While killing, they shouted with glee, "Go all out, you bastards!" The governor, witnessing this horrifying scene from above, turned pale. He had to cover his mouth with his hand to avoid making a sound. Seeing the corpses lying scattered on the ground, the governor fearfully backed away. He panicked and said to Vincent, who was calmly standing beside him, "He's gone too far, it'll be hard to clean up the blood later." Hearing the governor's concern, Vincent remained unfazed and said, "He's doing well. Because he's doing this, no one will suspect you, my loyal servant." At this point, the governor was so scared that he couldn't utter a word. Vincent raised his hand to fix his hair, unable to suppress a smile as he spoke. "Then I suppose we should start our work." In the chaotic scene, the girls tried to escape to save their lives. Lindsay lifted her skirt, struggling to run up the stairs, sobbing, "Running in heels is too hard." Eren, although scared, still tried to encourage Lindsay. "You might keep running, Lindsay." Luna, running ahead, turned back worriedly when she saw the two of them. Ingrid, sobbing, said, "Why are things like this happening, Your Highness?" Suddenly, as they were running, the huge Tolio stood blocking their way, causing the girls to halt suddenly. He wore a smile that looked truly terrifying, gazing at the girls as if they were prey, and tauntingly said, "I found you." He made his move, causing the surrounding space to fall eerily silent. The girls seemed to be struck by some strange force, suddenly becoming motionless with wide eyes. Tolio squinted and pointed at them. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "I will choose to eat." He pointed at Lindsay and Eren, making the two so terrified that their faces turned as pale as death. They trembled, clutching their throats tightly. Then he pointed at Luna and Ingrid and continued, "Who first?" Ingrid clamped her hand over her mouth, quietly terrified inside. "I can't breathe." Both of them trembled uncontrollably with fear. He continued slowly, "This." Luna clutched her throat, fearfully recalling, "This is just like that time." She recalled the moment Eren fought against the orcs, wondering to herself, "Is it the fear of the orcs?" Suddenly, his finger stopped, hovering in the air. Tolio walked closer to Luna, pointing at her and saying, "I choose you." His actions, along with his oppressive aura, made Luna fearfully stand still, unable to move. Tolio excitedly raised his sword to strike down, a wicked look on his face as he laughed loudly. "Ha ha ha." Luna fearfully raised her hand to shield her face, silently praying in her heart. A sound echoed as the two swords clashed together. Eren powerfully used his sword to block his attack. He held both swords, standing gallantly in front of Luna. Seeing Eren appear, Lindsay and Eren couldn't contain their happiness and said excitedly, "Brother." Eren's appearance surprised Tolio, rendering him momentarily speechless. Luna, seeing Eren, was also extremely surprised and called out his name, "Eren." Eren turned to check on Luna, asking, "Are you okay, Seirad?" Luna felt touched, blushing as she looked at Eren before her. Seeing Eren protecting Luna, Tolio secretly thought and smirked with satisfaction. "Hey, those fools took the bait and showed their faces without thinking." At that moment, Aang appeared from somewhere and spoke. No matter how closely we observe, Ian mocked Tolio and said, "It's still just a big pig." Aang's appearance brought him another surprise. Ian looked down at Tolio from the stairs disdainfully and said, "Do you think you only have one opponent?" At this time, Karda and Elpkin also appeared, causing him to widen his eyes in astonishment. Karda looked at the scene in front of him and excitedly said, "So what you said would happen is like this. Finally, things are getting interesting." Tolio was surrounded on all sides by Eren's group, and he had fallen into a passive position. He couldn't believe it and wondered to himself, "The one trapped is me." He looked at each person's face. Then, Tolio smirked sinisterly. He showed no sign of fear. Instead, he felt even more amused. He laughed loudly and said, "I see. Ha ha ha! But you foolish ones have never changed. He became more bloodthirsty and terrifying than before, confidently taunting, no matter how many pests there are, they will never be able to defeat me. In the hall, an intense duel is taking place. On one side is Eren Pendragon, wielding a sharp, long sword, while behind him are Eren, Lindsay, Luda Serad, and Ingrid, wide-eyed with a mix of worry and fear. On the other side is Ian Aragon, watching and smiling. The rest are Elkin Isla and Carta, wielding axes along with Tolio, who is holding a sword parallel to Eren Pendragon. Tolio looks at Eren Pendragon and says, dealing with 4 people is a bit much. Let me take care of the unnecessary ones first. After saying that, he steps forward and bursts forth like a raging flame. Eren Pendragon sees this and suddenly feels fear and wariness. Tolio stands like a blazing fire. He punches the ground with his hand. His magic causes the ground to crack. Ian Aragon, witnessing this, panics and stutters. What? The ground begins to tremble and shatter, prompting the 4 girls to turn and run. Elkin Isla and Carta, still shocked by Tolio's magic, find themselves falling into a chasm. At this moment, the entire floor on the 2nd level and the staircase is completely fractured. The ground is now a chaotic ruin littered with dust. Carta pushed himself up from the ground, struggling because he had just fallen from above. He looked up and angrily asked, "What the hell is that idiot doing?" Carta and Elkin looked towards the rubble and said, "He made us fall straight to the 1st floor." A group of people approached from behind Carta and Elkin and said, "Hey, look, it's the orc from before." The 2 turned around in shock. It was the guy with the blindfold and his 2 henchmen, who were laughing as if they had found a delicious meal. He said, "Great, eating those fat pigs is making me sick. Orc meat, first come, first served." When Carta turned and saw them, he suddenly realized and told Elkin, "The guy with the blindfold, we met them at the docks." Carta laughed, but his face showed pure rage. "Ha ha ha, I'm going to be the one to eat you with a nice barrel of beer on the side, you damn pirates." Then Carta grabbed his axe and moved towards the blindfolded man. From here, beneath the rubble on the 1st floor, was the battle of Carta, Elkin, and the pirates. Above, 4 girls along with Eren Pendragon stood near the cracked stairs. Higher up, Tolio faced Ian Aragon symmetrically. Tolio held his sword across his body, his tone dripping with disdain. "Well, it's just the cat and the snake left. Now we can enjoy ourselves properly." He glanced at Ian Aragon and said, "You go first, little cat." Ian replied, "Though you are a giant pig, your strength is not to be underestimated. But do you think?" Ian raised his sword, his presence radiating power, and asked, "That in a battle, the only thing that matters is strength?" This was his challenging question. Eren watched anxiously, fidgeting with her hands, her face full of worry and fear. She asked Ingrid, "Will the prince be okay?" Ingrid firmly reassured her, "Don't worry." Ingrid looked towards Ian, clenched her fist in a gesture of confidence, and cheerfully shouted, "My brother is not an ordinary person. People say that if we consider technique, he is the best in the royal palace. And I've never seen him lose even once." Ingrid continued to praise him, gazing at Ian, who was preparing to face Tolio. Ian raised his sword in front, glaring with hostile intent. Ian raised his sword, but Tolio managed to parry it. Ian continuously attacked, and Tolio could only defend without counterattacking. The duel was fierce. Witnessing the battle, Eren actively commented with praise. What a series of amazing attacks from the prince. It seems that the pirate can't retaliate at all. Ian Aragon suddenly changed his expression, thinking, "No." The 2 swords clashed against each other, and Ian Aragon's face suddenly turned fearful. He widened his eyes and thought, When the swords of both collided, I didn't feel anything at all." Ian Aragon looked at Tolio, who was continuously swinging his sword, and thought, did he just counterattack? Tolio grinned mockingly. Right here, he sneered. Then he struck directly at Ian's sword. Ian Aragon frowned with worry. Ingrid and Eren clenched their hands tightly, their faces drenched in sweat, their eyes wide with anxious fear. Tolio sneered. "The tyrant of the royal city, is this all you've got?" Tolio shot out sparks, advancing to deliver a finishing blow to Ian. Then Eren rushed in, slicing him with his sword. Tolio was knocked back. Ian shouted Eren's name. Eren said to Ian, "Let's attack together. He's not normal." Tolio got up, noticing a long bleeding wound on his cheek. He watched the blood drip down from his face and said in a growl, "That hit surprised me. How long has it been since I last shed blood?" He narrowed his eyes, his gaze full of killing intent. Perhaps he hesitated. "I should start with the snake," he said, referring to Eren Pendragon. Tolio tightened his grip on the shield, his voice dripping with disdain. "My meal has become much more interesting." He sneered, warning Eren and Ian, "Do your best, because if you lose, I'll eat both of you and those women as well." shifting to the sword fight between Kartha, Elkin, and the pirates. Kartha swung an axe, knocking one man over. Elkin swung a dagger, slitting another's throat. After that, Elkin took off running upward. Above, Ian was jumping to slash with his sword while Tolio blocked with his shield. Elkin saw this and frowned, his eyes narrowing dangerously. A man in a black cloak attacked Elkin from behind with a sword. Realizing this, Elkin turned around, dodging the cloak-wearer's strikes. He swiftly brought his sword forward, delivering a critical blow to the man. The sword was knocked out of his hand. The masked man began to tremble after losing his sword. The corner of Elkin's eyes was slightly reddened with fatigue as he asked the man, "You're that knight from before, aren't you?" The man suddenly opened his eyes wide, clearly surprised that Elkin remembered him. Elkin crossed his swords and said, "A knight from the Valvas region. When he feels the aura of another warrior, will never forget." The knight squinted his eyes defiantly. Then he picked up his sword and said, "I have a reason to eliminate you right now, so let's fight seriously." After that, the two advanced and crossed swords, glaring at each other with hateful looks. Tolio squinted and growled, "Give it your all." His body crackled with sparks. He held his shield and sword in a ready stance, then said to Ian and Eren, "If you lose, I will eat you along with the women too." Ian called Eren to discuss strategy. "Hey Eren, we will make him leave a gap in his defense at some point. When that happens, you take him down." Eren looked at Ian and replied, "That suggestion is quite unusual for a prince like you who loves to show off." Ian looked down and responded, "This is not the time to maintain that fake image. Even so, I am still the strongest master in the royal city, don't you know? I will be recognized for having fought him for a while." Ian's tone remained very arrogant. Then he continued speaking to Eren while looking towards Tolio. "The only one who could defeat that monster is you. You are stronger than I am." Ian hesitated to say. Hearing this, Eren hesitated. Then he smiled and reminded Ian, "Don't get yourself killed right away." Ian grabbed his sword, raised it close to his face in a ready stance, and said, "Not funny." After that, the two ran forward towards Tolio, who was ablaze with fierce flames. Below, two more battles were taking place. Kartha was fighting the pirates, while Elkin was battling the knight from Valvas. Kartha shouted, "Aura," and swung his axe at the pirate. Kartha looked at the brawling pirates and thought, "It's all chaos. Here I am still on the first floor fighting with these little skirmishers, and Isla has been blocked by some suspicious bastard on the staircase." Kartha looked up at the fight on the second floor and thought, "At this rate, we won't be able to get to the second floor to help." Elkin thrust his sword, but the knight dodged. The knight swung his sword over Elkin's head, but he managed to avoid it in time. Elkin slashed his sword horizontally at the knight, but he jumped higher to evade. Then he landed on the ground. Elkin turned, intending to run up to the second floor. The knight blocked Elkin and said to him, "I won't let you go up to the second floor." Elkin glared at him, hesitating. Meanwhile, above, Tolio laughed loudly and swung his sword. Ha ha ha. The three swords of the three fighters intersected. Ian drew his sword and swung it down. With one hand holding a shield, Tolio extended it to block Ian's sword. The battle was intense. The two continuously swung their swords while Tolio skillfully used both hands to ward off their attacks. One sword came dangerously close to Tolio's face but was blocked just in time. He seemed slightly impressed but still very disdainful. He said, "Is that all you two can do?" On his left and right, he was being attacked by two people with swords, but no matter how they tried, they couldn't hit him because he was very fast. Ian growled in anger, gritting his teeth as he thought, "Although he is large, he is still too quick." Sensing something was wrong, Eren shouted loudly to call Ian. Tolio swung his sword down, striking in Ian's back. Realizing what was happening, Ian parried and had his sword broken. The sword in Ian's hand shattered down to the hilt. Tolio happily and triumphantly said, "The first one." Eren ran towards Tolio. He opened his mouth wide, preparing to deal with Eren as he had with Ian. However, before he could swing, he was stopped. Ian had grabbed his sword arm. He was taken aback in surprise. Seeing this, Eren felt secretly pleased, his eyes lighting up. Ian shouted loudly, "Do it now, Eren, capture him." Eren was charging forward. At that moment, Tolio suddenly let go of his sword. Ian was surprised to see this strange occurrence. Then, Tolio forcibly threw Ian aside with great strength. Eren was also taken aback by this scene. Tolio was really skilled when he threw Ian towards Eren to take him down. Eren was genuinely terrified. The scene before him was the sight of the enormous Tolio running madly towards him. He used his shield to strike Eren's arm, knocking the sword away. Then, he hit straight into Eren's arm and body. At that moment, Eren was in pain and had vomited blood. Another slap from Tolio sent both of them flying far away. Eren fell backward and continued to spit out blood. Ian anxiously called out Eren's name. Tolio kicked Ian in the stomach, sending him flying upward. He laughed triumphantly. Ian was also vomiting blood. He was thrown and crashed his whole body into a table, flying up and looking very painful. Ingrid and Eren watched their injured brothers. The two girls shouted loudly, "Brother!" Tears streamed down their faces, with red, swollen eyes. Tolio looked truly terrifying, exuding a murderous aura. He laughed maniacally, cupping his hands together, and said, "To me, you humans are just food." Ya ha ha ha. Elkin below heard Tolio's triumphant and horrifying laughter and looked up. He shouted Eren's last name, Pendragon. The knight saw Elkin mourning for his friend and seized the opportunity to charge forward. He swung his sword, slicing Elkin's face, causing blood to flow. Then he pointed the bloody tip of his sword at Elkin and said, "Now is not the time to look away, is it?" Elkin, blood streaming down his face, gritted his teeth and growled. Tolio, please, looked at Eren and Ian sprawled in disarray, each in a different corner, and said, "Now let's..." He turned to Ian, who was unconscious in a puddle of blood, and said, "Now I have eliminated him." Then he looked at Eren, who was also unconscious, and continued, "The cat and the snake are next." He said savagely, "Next, it's time to feast on the women." He turned to the four women and stared at them. All four were trembling, crying in fear, but dared not make a sound. Suddenly, Tolio's expression changed. He was shocked to see Eren trying to stand up, covered in blood, with his left hand holding a sword. The four women cried out, "Brother Eren." As for Tolio, he continued to stare in astonishment, thinking, no way a human could stand up after taking that hit. He looked at Eren, who was weak and bloody, struggling to get up, and thought not only should his right hand be broken, but even his organs should have been crushed to pieces. He looked at Eren's face as he tried to open his eyes and heard him say, "You are truly strong." Eren praised Tolio, both for his physicality and skills. "You have no weaknesses at all." Eren and Ingrid were astonished by these words. At this moment, Eren had stood up straight, while Tolio remained wide-eyed in shock. Eren said, "But..." Eren widened his eyes as he looked at Tolio and continued, "I killed an opponent of your caliber a long time ago." Then from behind him, a figure with black hair and a black cloak appeared. After saying this, Eren stood up with his right arm battered. Tolio asked him, "So, a long time ago, you killed someone like me?" He raised his shield to his face, still sneering and contemptuous. "Ha ha ha! What the hell are you talking about? Did I beat you so badly that you went mad, you filthy worm?" Eren calmly responded, "I can explain, but you wouldn't understand." Eren frowned, thinking, "You are indeed very strong, but..." He remembered the image of the huge and savage demon. He thought, "You are nothing compared to the one who slaughtered half a legion of demons." Eren recalled the demon with red horns and sharp teeth, its gigantic form shoving a human into its mouth, tearing it apart and chewing it hungrily. It was the most wicked and cruel creature, the Troll King. Looking down at his bleeding hand, he thought, after. He gently spread his hand out and stayed in that train of thought. "I defeated it. I have it." The black-haired figure in a black cloak appeared behind him. He smiled faintly and mentioned this immortal body. Tolio witnessed this scene with wide eyes, a hint of fear in his expression. As he saw Eren's right arm slowly raised, he became even more astonished and frightened. He thought his right arm should have been crushed, so how can he still move it? Ingrid turned to ask Eren, "Has anything like this ever happened before, like what he said?" Eren replied, "No, my brother has never been in such trouble." Lindsay leaned over to say to Luna, "Maybe we heard wrong." Luna was puzzled. She thought, at that time, I still thought he had no sense of self-respect or dignity at all. She hesitated, but looking at Eren's determined expression as he faced the cruel Tolio. Tolio gritted his teeth fiercely, glared, and said to Eren, "Stop trying to look tough, you're half dead." He crazily swung his sword and shouted, "Damn you." Eren turned his face away. After Tolio swung his sword in a full circle, he saw that Eren had sat further back. Tolio angrily thought he shouldn't be able to. Looking at Eren swing his sword towards him, he thought he shouldn't be able to move like that. One swing of Eren's sword was blocked by Tolio. Suddenly, he sensed that something was wrong. Tolio swung his hand, causing Eren to be thrown backward. Eren slightly bent his knees, using his hands to brace himself to avoid falling. He widened his eyes as he saw Tolio running towards him with a shield. The large shield blocked his view, and Eren realized, because of the shield, I can't see where his sword is at all. Eren looked down. At this moment, the sword was positioned underneath the shield and was being pushed by Tolio's hand. It turned out he wanted to stab. Just as the thought finished, Tolio immediately lunged his sword towards Eren, but he managed to dodge in time. Tolio was both angry and surprised. Next came a series of relentless attacks, but no matter how he swung, Eren was still able to dodge. Eren forcefully blocked Tolio's sword and then knocked his weapon down. At that moment, Tolio's face contorted, switching from brutal arrogance to fear and disbelief. He was stunned, his eyes wide in disbelief. Eren withdrew his sword and said, I told you, didn't I? I have fought and killed opponents of your caliber before. The atmosphere around them was both strange and tense. Eren thought, the synergy between his sword and shield must be Ratchuan's swordsmanship. He recalled an ancient city, Ratchuan, built by ancient dwarves in the middle of the ocean, which had been invaded by orcs decades ago, and now it had become the largest orc kingdom in the empire. In his imagination was the image of an orc wielding a sword and shield. He thought, by combining the curved sword of the archipelago and the shield crafted by those dwarves, they had created a unique swordsmanship. He recalled the image of Tolio throwing Ian down to the ground and the way he threw the stranger earlier. He remembered Isla throwing someone and thought, it definitely resembles the kind of throw that Isla used. Eren looked towards Tolio. It seemed that he was also skilled in the southern martial arts. This meant that this monster... Eren lowered his head, lost in thought, either a renowned warrior from the south or the beast of a nobleman. Looking at Tolio, who was ablaze with hatred, he continued to think perhaps he is both an orc and... At that moment, Tolio furrowed his brow, thinking about Eren. It was clear that he had recovered and could even counter the Ratchuan swordplay. He imagined himself in the past attacking people. Those tiny little bugs who learn the royal standard techniques are crushed by this swordplay in an instant. Tolio continued to stare intently at Eren and thought, has he fought against someone using the Ratchuan swordplay before? No, there's no way this brat could have experience fighting it. He continued to be arrogant, considering himself superior in both strength and skill. But there was something very strange about that brat. Looking towards Ian, he thought, the blockhead I've dealt with before has not been completely defeated yet. Then he looked down at Elkin and Kartha, thinking that if the guys with him downstairs could manage to come up here, it would be quite dangerous. Tolio raised his sword and returned to his starting position. Due to the ambitions of the Sea Dragon King, he should eliminate that brat Pendragon as quickly as possible. He gritted his teeth and said to Eren, so that's it, you're quite good at dodging. He continued, like a mouse being toyed with by a cat. Eren didn't understand what he meant. Tolio continued, but you know, I hate fighting without a clear victor like this. So, he sneered and spoke with a tone full of murderous intent. Even worms should care about their comrades, right? Eren turned and realized something. Tolio was charging towards Ian with his sword and shield. Eren understood this and felt annoyed, thinking, damn it, his target is Ian. Ian was unconscious on the broken table. Tolio approached, grabbing one of Ian's legs and lifting him upside down. He laughed triumphantly and called out to Eren, hey, you white worm, since you keep dodging, I'm going to turn this stupid guy into, he shouted, a pile of bloody meat. Ian seemed to hear these words, so he suddenly opened his eyes, his face contorted in anger, fear, and hatred. Ian quickly grabbed a half-broken glass bottle, sprang up, and smashed it into Tolio's face. Caught by surprise, Tolio didn't have time to react. The bottle lodged in him, causing him to bleed. He knelt down, clutching his face and screaming in pain. Perhaps the bottle had damaged one of his eyes. Furious, he growled at Ian, you damn bastard, my eye. Ian boldly retorted, that worm not only knows how to run, but is also quite skilled at counterattacking, right, you fool? Upon hearing this, Tolio clutched his eye and screamed, die! Behind him, Eren continually swung his sword, catching Tolio off guard. Then, Eren slashed directly at him, the blows he delivered forming a whirlwind. Eren fiercely struck Tolio, who was holding one eye. Tolio panicked as he realized the space was filled with dust and smoke from the pressure emanating from Eren's sword. Tolio rushed to intercept Eren, who was angrily charging towards Ian Aragon, who lay on the ground. Ian Aragon watched in shock, thinking to himself, how can he still react at that moment? The sword in Eren's hand shattered into pieces. He quickly grabbed Tolio's sword-wielding arm, locked it tightly, and spun around, using the momentum to choke him. Tolio gritted his teeth, astonished. Is he using my blind spot to choke me? He silently let go of the sword, smugly thinking, but he summoned his overwhelming strength to stabilize himself and countered Eren. Tolio arrogantly claimed, for me, it won't make any difference. Eren swiftly raised his hand and grasped Tolio's thumb tightly. Tolio was extremely shocked, not understanding what Eren was planning. Eren used all his strength to break Tolio's thumb. The excruciating pain made his eyes widen in shock. Tolio let out a long, mournful scream, and Eren quickly seized the opportunity to knock him down. He gritted his teeth, using all his strength. One leg locked around Tolio's neck, while the other leg locked his arm, simultaneously wrenching his arm forcefully. Meanwhile, the sword fight between Isla and Vincent was taking place fiercely. He was engaged in a duel with Vincent, who was currently on Tolio's side. Both sides were locked in a stalemate, neither willing to yield to the other. Even Vincent seemed to struggle as he was overwhelmed. Seeing his sword breaking into pieces, he helplessly moaned. Elkin Isla, gaining the upper hand, decisively charged forward. Fragments of the sword and fresh blood splattered everywhere. Vincent had been wounded on the arm by Elkin Isla's strike. His sword was now useless, lying on the floor, the broken tip embedded in the stairs. Elkin Isla poised with two short swords and coldly remarked, "Such a slender sword is suited for assassination, not for one-on-one combat." Vincent, stunned, looked at the intact sword he had just held. Now left with only the hilt, speechless, he hurriedly covered the black and yellow tattoo on the area where Elkin Isla had slashed his shirt. He quickly noticed this strange action. The pained scream of Tolio echoed all the way of the battlefield of Elkin Isla, causing them to look up in astonishment. Vincent anxiously wondered, was that scream from the Dark King? Elkin Isla smiled triumphantly. He was stunned as he recalled Tolio's image in his mind. That monster's voice. How could he? In the Grand Hall, Carta furiously swung his axe and shouted loudly. Carta struck a fatal blow to Tolio's orc minion. The orc fell to the floor motionless, blood pouring from its neck. Carta angrily shouted, "Do you understand now?" Carta furiously cursed, "Damn pirate orc." Carta had defeated all the pirate thugs down here, defiantly declaring the orcs of Ancona are the strongest. Vincent, witnessing the orcs being taken down, was in a state of disbelief. The orcs from the archipelago had been completely wiped out. He looked at Elkin Isla standing in front of him, then glanced at Carta rampaging below, helplessly wondering, what exactly is that thing? Vincent quickly sought a way to escape. Elkin Isla was astonished to see Vincent choose to jump over the staircase railing to flee. Watching him land steadily, he was somewhat curious about the tattoo on Vincent's forearm. Vincent had run away, so Elkin Isla turned his gaze back to Eren's battle. He hurriedly ran upstairs to provide assistance. Tolio, with his broken thumb, coldly stood up. He took out his shield to defend himself while his broken arm hung limply. Eren gained the upper hand, holding his sword pointed at him. He excitedly mocked, asking, "The situation has changed, hasn't it?" Tolio gritted his teeth in anger, remaining still. He growled a threatening warning. "Don't rely too much on luck. Even if I lose an arm, I won't lose to an inferior creature." Elkin Isla and Carta quickly appeared to support him. He shouted, "Pendragon!" Tolio was shocked to see that both of them had survived the skirmish with his subordinates. Eren joyfully yelled, "Isla, Carta!" Tolio tightened his grip on the shield. Then, unexpectedly, he threw it towards Ian Aragon to create a distraction. Eren swiftly flew in to kick the shield away, and Ian Aragon instinctively raised his hands to protect himself, panicking and shouting. Thanks to Eren, the shield did not harm him. He realized he had fallen into a trap, so he turned to look for Tolio. Tolio seized the opportunity to escape through the window. He did not turn back to challenge Eren, but said, "Let's meet again in the future. When that time comes, I will surely decapitate you." He quickly jumped out of the window, not daring to hesitate. He brought his hand to his mouth and whistled. A resonant call responded to him. The monster appeared, allowing him to hold the reins and ride on its back. Eren, Elkin Isla, and the others stood silently by the window watching. Carta shouted in anger, "That damned pirate has jumped on the griffin's back and escaped." Eren calmly replied, "But I injured his right hand and eye, so he won't attack immediately." Elkin Isla said calmly, "Just now, the one who attacked me was that knight Vincent." Eren exclaimed in surprise, "What?" Carta was equally shocked. "Why would that knight?" Ian Aragon bitterly reasoned, "These chaotic incidents were planned beforehand, that filthy old man." Eren rested his chin on his hand, thoughtfully speculating. This reason alone may not be enough to prove anything. He turned to ask Elkin Isla, "By the way, is that knight Vincent really that strong?" Elkin Isla honestly affirmed, "In the battle, we were evenly matched. There's no way he'd be a nobody." He turned his gaze to the distance for calling. Moreover, he pointed to his forearm and stated the key issue. He has a tower tattoo on his shoulder. Eren was utterly astonished, the peaceful scenery of the seaside city illuminated by the bright moonlight. Helene was sitting reading a book on the balcony when she suddenly noticed something flapping its wings and flying towards her from afar. She gasped and whispered, "What are they?" A group of unidentified people were riding Gryphons, each wielding a sword aura. Helene gasped and shouted, "Griffins!" Tolio controlled the Griffin with one hand, successfully escaping. Suddenly, someone from below hurriedly shouted his name, "Tolio! Tolio Orangens!" It turned out to be the governor of Segunda, rushing over in a panic. He was panting and scolded Tolio loudly. "What's wrong with you, you bastard?" Tolio batted the Griffin to land. Indifferently lifting his chin, he replied to him, "Didn't you promise not to call me that?" The governor of Segunda furiously retorted, "Do you think I will keep my promise, especially when you were the one who broke the tree first?" He shouted in anger, "You have turned my mansion into a chaotic place, and you can't even kill a few targets." Tolio coldly replied, "Aside from the snake, I have already caught the cat, which has taken a lot of damage. He browned his words, his face hardening as he said, "So I just need the wizard I brought from the south to finish the remaining tasks." Segunda trembled and asked, "The wizard?" Tolio jumped down, walking closer to him as he continued. "That's right, you want to kidnap the mother of that white worm, don't you? I have already sent orcs there." He arrogantly joked, "Isn't it strange, a wizard specializing in brainwashing and assassination?" Tolio slowly approached the trembling Segunda, who was panicking, and confirmed, "If he is here, how can we not deal with them?" He shouted angrily at the governor, without any hesitation. "But because I had to send him to the mansion, we couldn't kill him. It's all due to your insatiable greed." Segunda stammered an accusation. "Shut up, Dark King. You bragged about your abilities, yet can't even complete the mission." He scolded loudly. "You are nothing more than a..." Before he could finish his sentence, Tolio flicked his finger, causing his face to contort, knocking out several teeth. He pitifully fell to his knees, moaning and holding his bloodied mouth. Tolio arrogantly threatened, "That's right, I still have to hurt you more." He coldly stomped on Segunda's limb, feigning earnestness to emphasize, "This way you won't be suspected of arranging all of this." He screamed in pain. Tolio snatched his stick and coat, happily declaring, "I'll take this as a reward." Then he abandoned Segunda lying motionless there and escaped. The orcs sent by Tolio to capture Helene were clashing fiercely with the Gryphon Knights. The valiant Gryphon Knights charged to attack the orcs, scratching the Gryphon ridden by the orcs. The orc tribe allied with Eren was fiercely battling Tolio's henchmen, gaining the upper hand. Those lowly figures were stunned as they said to each other, "What the hell? We have an advantage in numbers." Seeing the enraged orc tribe charging forward, they were terrified and admitted, "But they're too strong." Mark Killian decisively brandished his sword and charged forward, shouting to intimidate. With a single stroke, he had swiftly dispatched an orc. The knights under his command cheered. "You took him down. Truly the commander." He looked at the magical aura enveloping him and nodded in acknowledgement. The enhancement spell from that cleric is quite impressive. Crudual was the one operating the spell circle, boosting Mark Killian's forces, surrounded by a few Gryphon knights guarding the perimeter. He excitedly laughed and said, "After the incident with the centaurs, I found a reason to train again." A group of people were watching the battle unfold from a distance through a crystal ball. They observed intently and exclaimed in amazement, "Wow, the orcs famous in the archipelago, the Lachuan orcs, are being pushed back by the once dominant Pendragon army, no less." Golota, holding a poisonous centipede, spoke up to clarify, "It's just the enhancement spell." They were startled and called out, "Lord Golota." He chewed on the centipede and replied in a firm tone, "And it seems he's not the only one there who can use it. There's another mage of equal level as well." The dark aura from Golota rose tumultuously, and he arrogantly continued, "But of course, how could they be as strong as me?" His subordinates sensed the darkness emanating from Golota and silently expressed their concerns. Such a sinister aura, is this power that of a sorcerer? They held Golota's title in great respect, believing his power could slay thousands of knights and mercenaries. He maliciously smiled and said to his subordinates, "But after all, that is just bait." Through observing with the crystal ball, he deceitfully revealed his true intention. "While they are distracted fighting the pirates, we will kidnap the mother of that white worm." Golota added to his subordinates, "That is the order given to us by that junior. Oh no, the Dark King." He cunningly directed the crystal ball to Helene's location and then asked, "So, where is she?" Helene held Mia in her arms, doing her utmost to protect the girl, while Hazel and Tata trembled in fear. Kata frantically said, "Tata is so scared. Tata doesn't want to die." Kazal, terrified to the point of tears, still bravely replied, "Kazal is not afraid. I am not like you." Helene, despite being so anxious that she was sweating, resolutely reminded herself, "That's right, there is nothing to be afraid of. The soldiers are out there fighting for us." She firmly added, "I choose to believe that." Suddenly, a wave of dark energy surged into the room where the large door was securely latched in front of Helene. They were stunned and bewildered, staring at the scene. What was even more shocking was that the door was gradually melting away in an unusual flame. Helene panicked and thought to herself, "That metal door." Golota appeared with his minions after the door had completely disappeared. He arrogantly asked in a sneering tone, "Are you well, madam? Tie yourself up and come with us." He coldly threatened Helene, "If you resist, the trash next to you will melt just like the door did." Kata turned pale and stammered, "I don't want to turn into soup." Kazel shrank back in fear. "This is too scary." Helene hesitated. Then, for the safety of the children, she chose to step forward and surrender to Golota. She bluntly asked, "Is that the Governor Segunda's order?" Golota didn't care, just smiled wickedly and replied briefly, "Stop wasting words or I will change you." A strip of cloth shot from his hand, tightly binding Helene. She suddenly let out a scream and then resigned herself to being tied up. Golota even roughly covered her mouth. Seeing Helene tightly bound and falling to the ground, Tada exclaimed in panic, "Lady Elena!" The maids also anxiously shouted. Golota ordered his subordinates, "Take her away." They obediently complied, "Yes, Master Golota." Helene struggled to sit up, mumbling a few painful words. The excited subordinates rushed to grab Helene, feeling utterly impressed by Golota. "Awesome! We were able to easily kidnap the Duchess. The sorcerers are indeed on a completely different level from ordinary people." Suddenly, a blue light shot across one of the subordinates. Then it swept through all of Golota's little followers in a remarkably swift manner. Even Golota couldn't recognize what it was. He looked around in shock. The whole group, including Tada, stood frozen in fear. It was the mighty Soldrake appearing to rescue them. She exuded a cold aura, wielding an invisible sword that gleamed with a bright blue light. Helene joyfully called out Soldrake's name. Golota was stunned, his mouth agape as he thought to himself. The ones just killed didn't even have blood splattering out. He stammered, "Aura sword." Soldrake glared at him with a fiery gaze, her rage erupting dramatically. Golota trembled all over, terrified as he reminded himself, "All this time, I have killed countless people." Seeing Helene mumbling Soldrake's name, he was taken aback as he continued, "Knights, nobles, royal family, yet I am afraid." His eyes widened, filled with panic as he realized he was indeed scared. Facing Soldrake, Golota still tried to reassure himself. "That insignificant trash in front of me and that woman." He quietly observed Soldrake's appearance and fighting style. His shock became increasingly evident as he recognized Soldrake's true identity. Clearly, she was not human. The ornament on her forehead, the wings on her back, and the ability to create blades of light with her bare hands. Watching Soldrake skillfully wield that deadly sword, he trembled in fear and concluded. In Golota's mind appeared the imposing figure of the white dragon. Only one species could do this. He was alarmed and shouted, "Dragon!" But before he could finish his words, Saul struck him across the face with her aura sword. She coldly severed half of Golota's head without a trace of compassion. Elkin Isla was driving the carriage on the way back to the Pendragon estate. Ian Aragon was in pain, clutching his stomach, where Tolio had injured him. Ingrid held the shield close to Ian Aragon, anxiously asking, "Are you all right?" He gently replied, "I'm feeling better now. The healing magic of this shield is quite impressive." He forced himself to sit up and curiously asked, "But," Ian Aragon pointed at Eren and continued, "What is wrong with your body, Eren?" He skeptically analyzed, "You were crushed by that monster's shield, yet you still managed to get up right after and continue fighting." Eren looked away and simply replied, "It's the power of the white dragon." And Aragon stopped pressing for more information, leaned back, exhaled deeply, and nodded. The white dragon, impressive indeed. Luna Serud was lost in thought. The carriage moved slowly along the coastal road, heading towards the city. In Luna's mind, she anxiously pondered, is that really the case? At the mansion, the battle between the Latuan Orc Horde and the Griffin Knights was coming to an end. They fled, and the victory belonged to the Pendragon army. Mark Killian, injured in several places, was extremely cheerful as he said, "Look here." He eagerly continued, "We have completely annihilated the Latuan Orc army." Mark Killian celebrated with his soldiers, "The Pendragon army has won." Crudel patted the head of a Griffin Knight, smiling in shared joy. The Griffin eagerly let out a few cheerful cries. Then they gathered together, soaring in front of Soldrake. Helene stepped up to Soldrake, gently saying, "Thank you." She bowed her head, calmly waiting for Soldrake's response. She stroked the Griffin and simply replied, "Ray asked me to protect you, that's all." Helene straightforwardly continued, "I don't understand what you're talking about, but..." She thoroughly told Soldrake, "You are not responsible for protecting the Pendragon family. Your duty is only tied to the false covenant." She smiled sadly. "I know that much." Soldrake turned to look at Helene with a meaningful glance. Helene pondered, remembering when Gordon was still alive. She recalled the dragon form and human form of Soldrake for comparison. She had only seen the white dragon in this shape once. Soldrake appeared majestically before Gordon, walking alongside him. Helene's mind wavered when she saw Soldrake's radiant smile, stronger and more beautiful than any human. She remembered how she felt then. She could not suppress her jealousy. She closed her eyes and thought, but she spoke openly to Soldrake. "When you look at my husband, no, my son, I sense that you have..." Soldrake coldly gazed at Helene as she continued sincerely, a pained look, as if she was reminiscing about a distant past. Helene smiled gently. "Now I'll understand this feeling." She bowed her head, wholly entrusting Soldrake. "Please continue to protect my son from now on." Helene was tense and didn't dare to look up. She gathered all her courage and continued, "I understand that." She sorrowfully expressed her feelings. "It is possible that my son, no, Eren may now be someone else." Her hands trembled, tightly gripping her dress. "But I am a mother." Helene firmly stated, "Even if my son is someone else, no, even if the person inside him has changed." She could not contain her emotions and tears streamed down her face. I will still love him with all my heart. Now Helene no longer held anything back and honestly confided in Soldrake. I am trying to love him. She listened silently without responding. After a while, Soldrake spoke up. I feel the same way. I can understand the words you said, but she plainly continued. Whether Ray is Raven Volp or Eren Pendragon, she reached out to the sky as if trying to touch the distant moon. I still see X within him, but unfortunately the mood is out of reach, much like the feelings in your heart. Soldrake confidently asserted, so, among all the contract holders I have ever had, Ray is perhaps the one I cherish the most. The sea waves quietly lapped against the shore, and in the stillness of the night, two women were wholeheartedly expressing their feelings. Eren rushed to fling open the door and called out anxiously, Helene, Mom, he breathlessly asked. Are you okay? I heard those bastards attacked you. I'm fine, thanks to Soldrake. Helene replied with a smile, wiping the tears from her eyes. Oh, thank you, Soldrake. How are you? Eren hesitated to tell the truth, so he replied vaguely, Of course I'm fine, nothing at all. Helene joyfully responded, Is that so? Thank you for coming back. She gently extended her hand forward, embraced Eren, and tearfully said to him, Safe and sound, my beloved child. Eren was taken aback for a moment. She also embraced Eren. She suddenly asked, what happened, Mom? Eren pondered deeply. He looked up at the black sky adorned with countless stars and the bright moon, silently calling, Mom. Soldrake quietly observed Eren. Everything has been settled, so they all went into the house. Helene kindly said to Eren, Now sleep well, Eren. Eren cheerfully waved goodbye to him. Good night, brother. Eren was somewhat surprised to see Lindsay's shy demeanor. He recalled and hugged her, awkwardly saying, good night, my lovely wife. Lindsay shyly replied, Good night, Lord Eren. Luna Serad quietly watched the two of them. After bidding farewell to Lindsay, Eren approached Luna Serad and said, Hey Serad, you too. Go get some rest. Suddenly, she unexpectedly called out to Eren. Luna said seriously, I have something important to discuss with you right now. Eren was a bit surprised by this sudden suggestion. Luna turned red, saying nothing more. Two orc warriors lay still on the floor. They were the brave warriors who had sacrificed themselves in the recent battle. Their teammates, Carta and Cradle, silently looked at the two, the atmosphere filled with sadness and grief. Carta contemplated the bodies of his comrades, filled with sorrow. Suddenly, Carta shouted, attracting everyone's attention. Hey, aren't you envious of them? Everyone was surprised by his actions. Dying in battle is our honor. They both already know this. Carta continued to speak loudly to the other orc warriors. This is their greatest honor. Luna looked at Carta in confusion. She did not understand what Carta was doing. In contrast to Luna, the orc warriors seemed to be very supportive. They were excited, shouting loudly throughout the area. Carta enthusiastically said to Cradle, So instead of sending them back to the motherland in a boring way, why not send them off in style? Cradle smiled in agreement, and the orc warriors around shouted loudly, Orcs. The shout echoed, reaching the depths of the participants' hearts. Cradle raised his staff close to his head, silently reciting a spell. A blinding blue light appeared, surrounding Cradle's magical staff. Soon, green sprouts appeared around the bodies of the two orc warriors. They grew tall and extended rapidly. They blossomed with pure white flowers sparkling. Their bodies began to glow, lighting up the entire area. Thousands of flowers bloomed, spread out, and embraced the bodies of two orc warriors. Now, the two seemed to be only sleeping peacefully on the flowers. The scene is truly breathtaking. Other orc warriors begin to dance, cheering and singing as if there has never been a parting. We are comrades, hooray! We are brothers, hooray! Luna and Eren stand outside, quietly watching them. She exclaims, So beautiful! Eren stands still, silently watching. Luna's eyes well up with tears, her cheeks flush, and she continues, and sad too. That's true, Eren replies. The orc warriors, although very sad to lose their comrades, those they have stood by for so long, still dance and sing. It's not because they are indifferent. They do this to cherish the beautiful memories they have with their comrades, songs that evoke the great sacrifices of their allies and encourage them to move forward, steadfast into the future. Eren then speaks up, only those who fight alongside the dead are allowed to witness the ceremony. This is the most solemn burial ceremony for warriors. Normally, they would not allow others to witness this scene, so it seems they consider us family. Hearing Eren say that, Luna felt even more emotional. Tears began to shimmer in her eyes. Really? She hesitated. Eren contemplated for a moment and then said to Luna, You said you had something to say. Let's find a quiet place first. The moon in the sky tonight is beautiful. Its light is clear, illuminating the path the two people walked. After walking for a while, they stopped and sat on a long step. Luna started hesitantly saying, If I hadn't brought up the divorce then, would I have become your wife? Luna curled up, the moonlight shining on both of them. Eren was silent, not saying anything. I regret that after seeing your new self, but that was the family's decision, so I thought it was unavoidable and accepted it. Luna frowned and said sadly. Eren was deep in thought, his gaze distant. When we arrived at the mausoleum, I kept watching you. Luna said bashfully, her face turning red. She recalled the past when you protected me. That was when you stood in front, just in time to block Tolio's sword that was aimed straight at me. You were brave fighting for me. When she locked eyes with him, her heart suddenly skipped a beat and everything around began to fade into silence. In her eyes now was only the image of him fighting. Luna cried, her face contorting. This feeling probably won't change, but every time I think about it now. She turned, her face flushed, revealing her heart to him. She said loudly, I. But without waiting for her to finish, Eren interrupted, I'm sorry. I don't feel that way about you. His voice was cold, cutting off Luna's words. Luna froze, stunned for a moment, her eyes wide with surprise. I understand now. She lowered her gaze, her eyes filled with sadness and disappointment. I treated you very poorly before, and I am even more pathetic approaching you just as you became successful. Reflecting on her painful past, Luna spoke softly. Tears welled up in her eyes. I never thought I could be so foolish. Luna bowed her head while Eren remained silent and contemplative. The two sat under the moonlight, embracing the rustling night breeze. You're wrong. It's not about that, Eren said. Luna sat in silence, struggling to understand his words. I have never hated you or thought you were despicable, but in this life of mine, there is no real feeling. Reflecting on himself, he felt powerless. I am just a pawn, moving at the command of others. Emotions cannot exist within me. Eren held his head. Tears began to flow. I will say this to anyone who wants to date me. I'm sorry. You should go rest. He stood up and left, Luna's gaze always fixed on him. She sat alone there, crying silently. Below, a head with golden hair peeked out from behind a bush, watching Eren. It was Ingrid, the princess, who flinched and felt guilty when Eren caught sight of her. He walked alone on the long, wide, dark road. Behind him were two girls, always following him along his path. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind about a girl clutching him tightly and crying. He reminded himself that it didn't mean he could remain in this state forever. He looked up at the sky. Now he had to return to his homeland, the homeland of Raven. An image briefly appeared in his mind. Sisek, a boy tightly bound, kneeling helplessly before a fire. He raised his head high to look at the sky, his fist clenched with determination. One morning in a port, two people were talking at Luce, the trading center. Hey, have you heard the news? The Lachuan orcs are causing a big stir here. They barged into the governor's banquet with the nobles, killing them brutally to the point of leaving only scraps. The governor was severely injured. Except for that governor, before he could finish his sentence, a person sitting across from him shouted, Hey, you idiot, you're punished now. The person continued, What's astonishing is that those brutal Lachuan orcs were dealt with by the Pendragon family. The Pendragon warriors turned the tide and handled them. Huh? Really? The other person exclaimed in surprise. A dark-haired guy sitting nearby listened quietly to their conversation. He rested his chin in thought, looking at the balance in front of him. He picked up a coin from it and stared at it thoughtfully. All the Lachuan orcs were defeated by a lone Ancona orc warrior. He raised his hand and added another coin to one side of the scale. He continued to think about the one who would fight him, the Knight Valvas. The scale tipped to one side, and he added another coin to the other side. He frowned and scowled at the coin in his hand, thinking of a handsome young man with flowing golden hair. Then there was the Dark Emperor, Tolio Aranges, the undefeated monster in the south. A fearsome face that looked very thuggish appeared in his mind. Feeling oppressed, he fearfully recalled the day he encountered him. Even so, his eyes widened in fear as he stared at the coin in front of him. Suddenly, a loud voice called out, Sir Ron! Sir Ron! A person hurriedly ran toward him. What's all the noise? He turned around to look. The person hurriedly said, A huge business opportunity just suddenly appeared. The whole town is abuzz. Eren Pendragon is here. Ron was astonished, shocked. He widened his eyes in disbelief at what he had just heard. Eren stood with his arms crossed in front of Ron, turning his face to the side in admiration, and said, How extravagant. Eren continued to smile and said, With that equipment, a medium or small deal won't be able to afford to keep them. You must be making a lot of money, right? Faced with Eren's ambiguous comment, Ron's expression darkened significantly. He propped his chin seriously on his hand, his eyes fixed intently ahead. Then, Ron began pouring wine into a glass, while Eren turned his face away and continued, The governor of Seguda has developed it quite a bit, the economy of Luce. Eren's face looked as if he was pondering something. He rested his hand on his chin and expressed his thoughts. Surely he has an excellent subordinate. Suddenly, Ron raised his glass, cutting off Eren's words, and said, Cheers. Seeing the glass of wine in Ron's hand, Eren hesitated before taking it, saying, After thinking for a moment, Eren decided to reach out to take the glass of wine. But unexpectedly, Ron let go, and the glass slipped from his hand, falling freely. Seeing the glass about to spill towards him, Eren was a bit surprised, his eyes widening as he exclaimed, "A." Without waiting for Eren to react further, Ron suddenly swung his leg, preparing to kick Eren. Quick as a flash, Eren was still able to lower his head to dodge, his expression tense. Ron continued to raise his fist, ready to launch another attack. As Ron's punch was thrown, Eren also raised his fist to block it. Ron's punch merely grazed Eren's wrist. It seemed that this attack lacked power. Eren had grabbed Ron's collar at some point, while Ron had also grasped Eren's collar, both of their faces showing intense strain. Ron's hand tightened on Eren's collar, causing him to gasp for breath. Eren's other hand was trying to push Ron away, but it seemed ineffective. From fighting to verbal sparring, Eren remarked, "I expected at least this much from you, crafty fox. You fought evenly with Isla." Ron, not to be outdone, replied breathlessly, "Aren't you the crafty one? You pretended to fear my aura flow." Still gripping Eren's collar, Ron continued, "Since you were able to handle the Dark King, you must be very strong." Suddenly, his face darkened as he spoke in a low voice. "However, if you think you can easily kill me, you are mistaken." He seemed much angrier as he shouted, the surroundings almost igniting. "Because in this world, I still have things to do." Hearing these words, Eren's expression became solemn. Not as angry as Ron, Eren calmly responded, "With the power of this trading chamber, are you planning to reduce the economic disparity in the Empire and develop it?" His words and composure startled Ron. The two let go of their grip, and Eren continued, "You are mistaken. I am not here to capture you, of course, nor to kill you." The more Eren spoke, the more serious his face became. "I want to buy you back, the master of the Tower of Dusk, Ron Vincent." Ron was shocked, even more so when he heard that, to the point of sweating profusely. Seeing Ron in a state of fear, Eren began to think. At first, he hadn't realized it, even though the name Vincent was quite common. He recalled Ron's appearance from before, but from what Isla had reported to him, he had a tattoo of the tower on his shoulder. The Tower of Dusk reminded Eren of the image of two towers with a staff in between. He thought again of the image of the sturdy, towering spire. Very little information about it is known to outsiders, but there are certainly two things. Eren began to ponder in his mind. First, its members have tattoos of the tower. The talented members among them possessed exceptional abilities in numerous fields, and they refer to the leader in that field as the master. The other point is that for the sake of the world, they assure themselves to follow the path of righteousness. He recalled the past. In his previous life, he had heard the story of them in the demon court from the mouth of a colleague he worked with. Knowing the future and Ron's intentions, Eren smiled smugly and began to persuade. "You first want to consolidate Luce's foundation and seize control of all the coastal members of the Empire." Ron was taken aback, stunned by his words. Eren confidently continued to lay out Ron's plan. "Through this Chamber of Commerce, you want to unite the power of small and medium-sized merchants and through benefits exert pressure on the big merchants and nobles to disrupt their main sources of income and prevent them from becoming too powerful." Ron was taken aback, his eyes wide open, his pupils as if they wanted to leap out, fear rendering him speechless. "How is this possible? I've never revealed the true nature of my plans to anyone else. But how does this person know about it?" He stared in disbelief, silently thinking. Eren simply remained quiet, smirking slightly while observing Ron's reactions. He knew that by doing this, he was poised to eliminate economic disparities within the Empire. "You have made a grand plan." The gray shadow of Dusk Ron. His name had spread far in his past life. He was one of the heroes. In contrast to Eren's joy and self-satisfaction, Ron, filled with fear and caution, took a few steps back, his eyes still fixed on him with suspicion as he felt his meticulously crafted plans had been seen through. Eren crossed his arms, tilting his head in confusion, his voice full of regret. "I don't understand why someone of your caliber would work under a person like Count Segunda." Ron remained silent for a long time, unsure how to respond to Eren's question. He turned his gaze away, avoiding Eren's eyes, his voice hesitant and heavy as he said, "That guy is not without talent. He recalled the time when he willingly worked without caring about my social status and used me to skillfully develop the economy of all Luce. Because of that, the population has become more crowded and their lives have improved and become more abundant. But also because of those profits, he planned to kill me and Yin." Eren's voice turned cold as he glanced at Ron, with a probing gaze, perhaps even from the Crown Prince, Scion too. Ron casually replied, "So what?" Eren was slightly taken aback, turned away silent, unsure of what to say. Ron nonchalantly said, "Those stupid nobles and royals always struggle to gain power and influence, regardless of who wins or dies. It doesn't concern me." Ron, with an emotionless face, poured a glass of wine while saying, Because in this world, my perspective is to bring prosperity and safety to everyone, that's all. His hand holding the poured glass of wine remained still as he quietly stared at the beautiful liquid, slowly raising it to his lips for a sip. After taking a small gulp, he sarcastically said, "Besides, all notables are, in some way, like Count Segunda." Eren smiled at Ron's judgmental attitude. "Even me, Eren Pendragon?" Upon hearing this, Ron put down his wine glass, shooting a sideways glance at Eren. Though there was no killing intent, it was full of scrutiny. "I don't know yet," he said, pondering, lightly shaking the wine glass in his hand. Eren secretly laughed. The plan to make Ron waver had picked up momentum, just as he had hoped from the beginning. Eren laughed and continued to draw Ron in. "Try coming to the Pendragon estate. I will treat you like a guest in my house. After that, you can make your own decision." Ron fell silent at this, casting a dubious and cautious glance at Eren. Without hesitation, Eren continued, "If you think that is for the benefit of everyone, that you can try to cut off Pendragon's revenue, or even attempt to kill me, you can do whatever you want." Ron felt a turmoil of emotions after that last statement, staring at the wine glass in his hand without speaking for a while. "If you accept me as an ally and you want to expose all the schemes of Count Segunda, are you looking forward to that?" He elegantly raised his wine glass to take a sip. "Of course, that's part of it too." Eren crossed his arms and affirmed. Ron remained silent, surely calculating in his mind. He smiled, a hum escaping his lips. "All right then, I will try to cooperate with you." Eren smiled, elated as he walked away after successfully convincing Ron. "I am really looking forward to that." In his hand, he tossed a coin into the air towards Ron's scale, leaving him surprised while Eren strolled casually away. Ron was astonished, his eyes wide as he watched the coins in the air. How strange it was, a coin subsequently landed on one side of Ron's scale in an orderly fashion without falling off any. Ron, still bewildered, looked toward Eren. After taking a few steps out the door, he waved his hand. "That is for the beer we toasted together." Ron was still a bit surprised. He stared blankly at the scale, which had tilted toward the side with the coins Eren had just thrown in. He smiled faintly, thinking about Eren Pendragon, with whom he was about to embark on a promising journey ahead. As the sunset painted the vast sea a deep red, the rosy glow enveloped the scenery, making it even more poetic, beautiful like a landscape painting. At night, the moon rose high, casting a sharp, cold light illuminating everything. Even though it was late, many houses were still lit up and awake. "Is your wound okay now, Ian?" The one asking is Eren. He and Ian were standing together on the balcony, each holding a glass of red wine. Ian smiled, leaning against the balcony. "Yeah, it's all thanks to that healing shield." Saying this, he turned to look at the night sky, feeling somewhat melancholic. "This expedition feels like hell. Ingrid will be scarred for the rest of her life." Then Ian suddenly jumped up, pointing his finger at Eren's face. "I won't let you take my sister." Eren maintained a calm expression. "Are you that determined? That's fine. I'll cause trouble for you. Make you deal with it." Ian pretended not to hear, changing the subject. "We're going to Sisek now, right?" Eren put his hands in his pockets. "We need to continue our investigation. This time I'll take Isla and Sol with me." Ian looked somewhat worried. "Is it just the three of us? Is that really okay? We have no idea what the enemy is plotting." Eren nodded with a smile. "I'm sure you've witnessed the strength of me and Isla at the estate of Count Segunda. The last person was much stronger than both of us." Eren's expression was very confident as he said these words. Ian chuckled. "I guess so. After all, she is a dragon, a monster with the appearance of a human." He suddenly pondered, "Well, calling her a monster doesn't quite fit, but what kind of creature is she?" Ian recalled the fierce battle with Tolio. A single strike from Tolio had broken his sword. A person with high combat value like Eren also had difficulty confronting him. Tolio, the leader of those pirates, has truly incredible strength. Anne gradually spoke. "Even when fighting both of us at the same time, he still wasn't at a disadvantage. Clearly, he is not an ordinary person." Eren silently agreed. He must be a half-orc, and he is also skilled in southern combat techniques. Anne seemed to contemplate. "So, after Count Segunda, there is still an even greater enemy behind that incident." Eren crossed his arms over his chest, remaining silent. A moment later, he slowly said, "However, having someone as a friend gives me great peace of mind." This statement seemed to catch Ian off guard. Eren had a calm expression. "In the battle with that monster, if you hadn't been there, I surely wouldn't have survived." Each word Eren uttered made Ian feel increasingly frightened. He stammered, You. Several times he found himself at a loss for words. Then, filled with disbelief, he questioned, "Did you hit your head? So you really were injured in the fight with the sea?" Before Ian could finish his sentence, he angrily shouted at Eren, "Hey!" The sound was so loud that it echoed throughout the night sky. Ian suddenly calmed down, putting on a relaxed expression. "So we will set off tomorrow morning. Seeing Ian's facial expressions change continuously in such a short time, Eren really felt a bit speechless. Ian ran his fingers through his hair, serious as he added, "We also need to find Goofly in the royal palace." Goofly. Eren silently repeated this name in his mind. According to his memories from his past life, this man would become the emperor in the future. Thinking of this, he felt a bit anxious. His face gradually turned serious. "Don't be careless, our enemies are everywhere." In contrast, Ian's expression was unfazed and he smiled, pointing at Eren, "You too." The next day, Eren and the others bid farewell to Princess Ingrid and Luna as they boarded a yellow carriage. Ingrid leaned out of the carriage window, beaming and waving at them. Eren and the others smiled even brighter, enthusiastically waving back. Only Luna sat quietly in her seat, gazing off into the distance, resting her chin in thought. As dusk descended, a white horse stood on a lush green mountain, gazing down at the scenery of the town below. On the horse, Vincent, draped in a black cloak, quietly observed the view from the mountain. Then he silently rode away, his figure gradually disappearing into the twilight. At night, at the governor's mansion of Segunda, inside the room, Segunda sat on a large bed, pulling at his hair in frustration. His body shook violently, his mind in turmoil. What should I do now? What should I do? This morning, Anne had set off for the royal palace. The assassination plan had failed, and the more he thought about it, the more he became terrified. Countless thoughts flashed through Segunda's mind. He couldn't manage to reach Duchess Helene. Vincent had disappeared, leaving him in a tangled mess. Segunda furiously hit his thigh. What the hell had happened? Damn it. Nothing he did was going smoothly. He clenched his fists. Somehow, he had to make Goofly the crown prince as soon as possible. No, Segunda mumbled, if they come here to find clues behind the assassination plot against Prince Cyan, and if they come to Sisek to find evidence behind the incident, what is promised to happen? The future will change. Thinking of this, he became even more terrified. Segunda grew anxious. I have to contact them. In a desolate mountain area in Sisek, the sound of hoofbeats and shouts echoed loudly. A few fearsome griffins swooped down. Their targets were a group of terrified people riding horses as they fled beneath the canyon. One of them shouted in panic, "Damn it! They're about to catch up. How come those monsters are here? I knew we shouldn't have come. This place is cursed land, Sisek." As he spoke, the Gryphons were almost upon them. Suddenly, several arrows flew through the air. The arrows struck the Gryphons with precision, causing confusion and shock among the group. Seeing the Gryphons fall to the ground, everyone was bewildered, unable to comprehend what was happening. One person looked around and suddenly noticed three cloaked figures standing on a ledge high above. The archer was none other than Elkin Isla. At that moment, a Gryphon suddenly swooped toward Isla's group. A man clad entirely in black drew his sword. He lunged at the Gryphon, swinging his sword fiercely at it. The previously pursued group watched in astonishment. Gryphon had his wing cleaved by the man in black. He stood there proudly and defiantly, blood still dripping from the sharp edge of the sword. He had black hair, sharply defined facial features, and looked extremely cold. After seeing him clearly, the crowd seemed to fall into another kind of fear. Damn it, a mercenary. If we provoke them, we'll be in big trouble. Suddenly, the man in black turned and walked away. They exclaimed in surprise, "Huh?" Someone chased after him. "Hey, aren't you going to take our money?" The man in black showed no interest, focusing solely on wiping the blood off his sword. "I don't need that. I'm just testing my sword." The group tried to befriend him. "Thank you so much. What is your name?" He walked away without looking back at them even once, briefly saying, "Raven is my name." Then he looked up at his two companions above. "Let's go, Elkin and Sol." Hearing this, both Elkin and Sol took off their hoods, revealing their faces. Raven's brood continued onward, as if nothing had happened. In a village in Sistek, in Elma's tavern, the place was bustling with guests, all laughing and talking animatedly. A waitress approached a relatively quiet table carrying 3 glasses of water. The guests sitting there were completely cloaked from head to toe, looking quite peculiar. The waitress smiled and asked, "Have you decided what you would like to order?" She leaned closer to a man in a black cloak and whispered, "Drinks, food, or if you like, you could even order a girl. Can I prepare those things for you?" The man in the black cloak suddenly tossed a few coins onto the table. The waitress was startled and only heard him say, 2 beers, herb-roasted chicken, and smoked pork, and the famous rice here. With that, he took off his hood. The man in the black cloak was none other than Raven. A little later, a feast was served. The rice here was made with a variety of ingredients, steaming hot. Elkin took a spoonful to taste and said, "Rice? I haven't eaten it since I left the south." Raven began to introduce his homeland. Sisek is a mountainous region, so it's not suitable for growing wheat. Instead, because it rains a lot here, people have built terraced fields on the mountains to grow rice. Elkin exclaimed, "You know a lot about Sisek." While the two were talking, Sol was still diligently chewing on a chicken leg. Hearing Elkin say that, Raven was silent for a moment. I guess so. Elkin focused intently on him. Then he didn't say anything more, concentrating on eating like Saul. Over here, the three of them quietly had their meal, in contrast to the bustling atmosphere around them. The customers that came here were all sorts. There was one lewd guy making a scene, grabbing the skirt of the female server earlier. You're so cute, my love. Some people came here to flirt, while others were here to show off and provoke. Do you want to fight? Is there a problem? Raven silently took it all in. Mercenaries and monsters roamed all over this barren mountainous region, the cursed land of Sisek. His gaze suddenly turned cold. The name of this place appeared 10 years ago. The feudal lord of Sisek, Count Brescia, had a blue flag with a proud horse rearing up on its hind legs with a wreath beneath it. The story related to him is that this man paid a large sum of money to buy the title of lord from the empire. Since then, the royal army, the power that previously controlled this land, has retreated, allowing Brescia's army to take control. However, Brescia, who had spent most of his money to purchase the estate, could not defend his land later on. After this land fell under their control, gangs and monsters swarmed in like a storm, and the government in Sisek collapsed from that point. To protect themselves, the people who could not rely on their lord began hiring mercenaries with the little money they had. Raven recalled silently, and while that was happening, the Veldt clan was training real soldiers to ensure the safety of the people. It wasn't until issues arose within his clan that things changed. Raven looked at the two people who were focused on eating next to him. Elkin and Sol, two sisters, with Sol being his wife. Suddenly, a curious group approached to get acquainted with Raven's group. Are you all mercenary families? That's not very normal, is it? Raven did not bother to look at him. I guess so. The brown-haired guy didn't notice Raven's unfriendly attitude. So he also came to hunt monsters, huh? In this land of Sisek, monsters are everywhere because the feudal lord hasn't been able to control them. This news successfully caught Raven's attention. The brown-haired guy continued passionately. Not just the villagers, but even the nobles don't know what to do with them. The tasks and rewards are very high. There's no other paradise for mercenaries. If you're confident in your abilities, then that's it. He smiled and raised his glass. Raven and Elkin remained silent. Seeing this, the short-haired woman rested her chin on her hand and smiled. What about you, Elkin? You seem nice, and your face is cute too. I think you're my type. She cheered. Hey, why don't you come with us? We won't let you down. The two other men exchanged glances, somewhat speechless. The black-haired guy sighed silently. She's at it again. This nymphomaniac is why those harassers keep approaching her. The short-haired girl was not ready to give up. She slammed her glass on the table. Oh, I know, those slanted eyes drive me crazy. Elkin, come to this hot girl. Elkin pretended not to hear and continued eating diligently. The brown-haired guy looked a bit embarrassed. She's always like that. Please don't mind her. Raven replied coldly, fine. He began probing for information from the brown-haired guy. Are you saying the nobles are hiring mercenaries? The brown-haired guy quickly added, that's right. Raven pondered, recalling the lord's face. He looked somewhat weak with a sly smile. He thought to himself, is it Rove Tylan again? The brown-haired guy sitting across from Raven suddenly flinched. He was sweating profusely, staring wide-eyed at Raven. What is it? Did I just feel this guy's bloodlust? While talking, Raven stood up and announced that he would go to Rove Tylan's territory with them. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. It seems we found some decent teammates. Is there anything wrong with that? Elkin's eyes widened, confused. What? What did you say? While Elkin was still puzzled, Scylla cheerfully grabbed his hand and said to Elkin, you understand what he means, don't you, my love? Scylla emphasized, I can fight and do a bunch of other things too. I will teach you everything, Elkin. It seems fate has destined us to be together. Didn't you say those connections are very important? Meanwhile, Elkin helplessly watched White Dragon leisurely drink while he was being firmly held by Scylla, who wore a hostile expression. When they returned to the inn in the lounge, Elkin seriously asked, what do you mean by that, Pendragon? Why didn't they have to go with those three? He answered nonchalantly, to gather information from them. After all, they've traveled all over the Empire. Besides, the main issue is that traveling with them makes it easier for your group to disguise yourselves, especially White Dragon. Her appearance is too distinctive. Raven looked out the window. The more we stand out, the harder it is to move. Thus, his facial expression gradually shifted to anger. Speak of the true objective of our mission. The atmosphere became quiet. White Dragon and Elkin looked at him for a moment. Then, before resting, White Dragon had seen his memory of that Rove Tylan. White Dragon suddenly asked, is he the one who accused Raven and destroyed the Veldt clan? He sank down. So you've seen my memories, haven't you? When it comes to Rove Tylan, he felt an intense rage towards him. Scene change. Raven remembers the past when he was still in his old body, when the Veldt clan still existed. The youthful boy, full of aspirations for the future. Ha! Raven eagerly exclaimed, am I really going to become a knight in the Brescia clan? Rove, that's right. Along with Jeff, my son. Ruv, with a fabricated expression, cheerfully said, "It's because your swordsmanship is exceptional that I recommended him as a knight. At that moment, Raven was Raid, in good mood, running home. I did it, father. Brother, Tylan has nominated me and Jeff to be knights. As long as I do one task for Tylan, I will become a knight." His father and brother were very happy about this. Mr. Gray said, "Because Tylan is the most trusted subordinate of the Count, he is indeed authorized to make such a recommendation." But little did they know that in their joy, they were about to fall into the deadly plan concocted by Ruv Tylan. The next day, everything changed. A group of knights stormed into their estate to subdue his family. The soldiers shouted, "Traitors! Capture them!" Raven, terrified, thought to himself that there must be some mistake. We've been wronged. After hearing what Ian had said, Raven recalled the letter he had been tasked with delivering to Prince Cyan. He is secretly visiting Sisek. He had been poisoned by the ink in the letter, and the letter had vanished by itself. There must be some kind of magic placed on the letter. As the messenger, his family was the prime suspect and had been arrested, brutally tortured. And then, when he was lying in pain on the cold dungeon floor, Ruv Tylan stood before him with the contemptuous expression of a man who enjoys destroying others. He spoke to Raven. "Your father, Grey Baltai, has confessed. He was hired for 5 gold bars to have his son swap the letter with a tool for assassination." Raven stared at him in disbelief. "What?" Ruv Tylan continued. "To ensure that his eldest son could inherit the family safely, he let his worthless second son do this. How disgraceful!" Ruv kept insulting, despite Grey being honored as a noble knight and a good friend. Not finished yet, Raven shouted, "Don't joke with me. My father would never say such things. You are the one." He was seething with anger. Ruv, now revealing his true nature, continued to mock, clearly enjoying the moment. "Tell me, whose words will people believe? The vassal, the most important Count of Brescia, or the second son of a lowly family? Even a child would understand that." Raven clenched his teeth in anger, looking at him without being able to do anything. That bastard! He would let Raven escape from this place and be sent to the Demon Legion. If he survived 10 years in that hell, his sins would be forgiven. Yet someone like him was imprisoned, forced to obey others. That truly warmed his heart. Raven looked at him in confusion. Rose said, "You should be grateful for your father's testimony. Because of that testimony, Raven has a chance to live." Ruv Tylan looked at Raven with disdain. Raven shouted in anger, holding the bars, looking in the direction Ruv went and cursing. The words affirmed, "I will definitely kill you. I will survive those 10 years and tear you apart into 100 pieces." At that moment, his will was determined to take revenge and revive the family. Shifting back to the present, Raven trembled. My father lied because that was the only way to save Raven. It was all because he had swapped the letters. The members of the Velt family were falsely accused of being traitors, and besides him, everyone was hanged. Raven could not suppress his killing intent in anger. They will disguise themselves and approach Ruv Tylan, looking for an opportunity to imprison him and make him confess all his sins. White Dragon was surprised to see the murderous aura and power emanating from Raven. His appearance was truly terrifying when he spoke about those who orchestrated all the suffering that the Velt family had to endure. With that frightening expression and deadly aura, he said, "I will definitely find all of them, and I am sure I will hunt them down and kill them all. Today is not a day that can be considered nice." Dark clouds loom over a large house where the voice of someone can be heard asking, "Are we really going to go with them?" Scylla sat at the dining table, looking at the 2 people beside her, holding a fork with food on it, saying, "If you don't like it, then go by yourself." Jovi, just finishing his meal, seemed quite surprised by this remark. Gus next to him had not yet touched the food on his plate, arms crossed high and mighty, said, "Stupid woman, leave me alone." Gus continued to keep his arms crossed. He remembered the figure of White Dragon and then said, "The woman who is with them seems like she neither can hear nor can talk to us. Is she really a mercenary?" Joey replied, "But according to what they said, she is the strongest one." Gus immediately retorted, "I'm only crazy if I believe that." Scylla was eating and listening while sweating. Surely that's the case in Jody's contemplation. Jody looked at her plate of food, pondering. There must be some strange things, but on the other side, Raven was darkly thinking about the deadly aura he had sensed in that moment, confirming that they were not just nobodies. Back at the dining table of Scylla, Jody, and Gus, Jody was sipping her drink while saying, "Don't worry about that." Jody cheerfully signaled optimism. "Because my instincts are never wrong." Suddenly someone called out, "Jody." It was Raven, White Dragon, and Elkin. Earlier, Raven had called Jody and continued, "Let's go to Ruv Tylan's territory." On the way, Raven asked, "How long will it take to reach Ruv Tylan's territory?" One person in the group replied, "After leaving Elma, it should take half a day." As they approached the city gate, seeing the chaos ahead, Gus asked in confusion, Is there some kind of commotion at the city gate? A group of mounted people in sky blue attire, holding a flag with a golden horse. One of them shouted, "Bow down, you peasants. The lady of the Brescia clan is coming. She is the flower of Sisek." In the carriage sat a curly-haired blonde girl, holding a feather fan that she waved gently. She spoke, reminding the one who shouted earlier, the carriage is not just for Sisek, it belongs to the Empire as well. She folded her feather fan and rested it against her chin, continuing, "One day I will win the heart of the prince, leave this filthy land of Sisek, and become a queen." The group in the carriage burst into a loud laugh. Gus, having witnessed the scene, disdainfully said, "We've heard rumors that the Count's daughter is nothing but trash, and it seems they are not wrong at all." Skilla beside him reacted without surprise, echoing Gus's sentiment, and asked, "I'm much more charming than she is, right?" Gus immediately retorted, "No way." At that moment, Joby offered her input. "We should steer clear of troublemakers. Let's just go Raven." Ignoring everyone, Raven proceeded without hesitation, leaving the others quite astonished. Upon seeing this, Jody instantly wanted to intervene, shouting, "Hey, Raven." Raven's eyes turned green, sharper in focus. Looking at the flag, he thought of the Brescia clan. Images from the past flashed in his mind. The members of the Brescia clan only used swords. Raven's thoughts continued. They were the ones who accused his family. Their swords pointed at a defenseless group. White Dragon immediately stepped up to block Raven, calling out, "Ray." White Dragon's hands grasped Raven's. It seemed that Raven sensed it, and his face looked less frightening than before. Raven calmed down and replied, "I know, we don't have time for this today." At that moment, White Dragon led Raven away to another location, clearing the way for the carriage. The curly-haired girl inside the carriage suddenly pointed at Raven and shouted, "Wait, you over there." She acted like a madwoman, showing no courtesy, and pointed accusingly. "You just glared at Tatine, that trash mercenary. Kneel down right now." Elkin said irritably, "Hey, it seems we're not moving fast enough." The knight outside reminded her, "Miss Sophia, if you keep behaving recklessly like this." "Do you dare to interrupt me, Chief Knight?" Sophia shouted. "I command you to capture them and force them to kneel immediately." At that, 3 knights charged towards Raven to capture him. The first man was knocked back, the second was hit in the stomach by Elkin, and the third had his legs swept out. They were all sent flying. Lady Sophia and the knight commander beside her were quite surprised by the series of events. The 3 men with Gus were no less astonished. In less than a moment, they were knocked away. Elkin spoke up, warning, "If you dare lay a hand on him," he said threateningly, "you have to go over my dead body first." Elkin gently touched the sword at his waist. The action, along with Elkin's gaze, made Sophia tremble, and she fearfully said, What do you mean? I am the daughter of a count." Elkin showed no concern, drawing his sword partially from its sheath. "I have a care about your lineage." This made Sophia shiver and scream in terror. Raven intervened, saying, "Stop it, Elkin." Meanwhile, Elkin's sword had been drawn and was swinging. A strong gust of wind clashed. Fortunately, the knight commander was able to parry Elkin's strike. These actions also surprised Raven and the White Dragon. The knight commander, understanding the situation, begged, "I beg you for mercy, warrior Valvas." Elkin remained silent. Sophia, clutching the nose that lay on the ground, also expressed her surprise. "Valvas? What is Valvas?" The knight commander turned to Elkin, his face expressionless, and said, "They come from the far southern regions and are knights from a chaotic land called Valvas. They are knights of incredible strength and will kill anyone who dares to raise a sword against their master." The knight commander also glanced at Sophia and continued, "Whether noble or royal, you still have much to learn about this world, miss, so do not be too proud of your lineage." At this point, the knight commander turned back to Elkin and continued, "However, your skills are truly remarkable." He then asked, "Could you tell me your name?" Elkin, not particularly interested, replied, "I have no intention of revealing my name to you." Sophia could only resentfully look at the knight commander. As she moved towards the carriage, she added before leaving, "I will inform my father about this." At this moment, Raven thought of the Brescia family, commander of the Fillmore Knight squad. Recalling the recent confrontation between Elkin and the chief knight, he thought back to when he was young and remembered that knight as an exceptional warrior wishing to be like him. It was remarkable that he could block Isla's attack. Looking at the back of the carriage, someone said, "It really is shameful to serve under Count Brescia." On the way, the 3 of them were chasing the 3 Raven members. The trio was quite excited. Jody said, "You really surprised me back there. Are you really a knight from Valvas?" Skilla chimed in, "Teach you the technique you just used." Skilla clung to Elkin, saying, "Teach it well," which left Gus behind speechless. Gus thought to himself, since he is a knight from Valvas, he won't listen to someone weaker than him. Gus looked at Raven, thinking this meant, looking closely at Raven, he continued, "This person is much stronger than him." At this point, Gus turned to Jody and said, "Your intuition really doesn't disappoint, Jody." Jody, hearing this, replied proudly, "Did I not say so?" After a moment, Skilla shouted, "We see it now." There appeared a magnificent castle hidden in the darkness. Skilla's voice was relentless as she said, "The domain of Ruv Tylan." A castle appeared and disappeared in the night. Inside sat a brown-haired man with his chin resting on his hand, saying, "So, do you all want to join me, Ruv Tylan?" At that moment, opposite the man were 6 members of the Raven group. Jovi spoke up, "That's right, but we are professional warriors." Skilla added, "We get paid to defeat enemies. That's our job." Gus also responded, "After that, we do not agree to become loyal dogs." The brown-haired man sitting in the chair opposite them began to speak again, saying, "Well, surely, you all seem to truly possess the skills you just mentioned." The brown-haired man gestured towards the 3 members of Raven, White Dragon, and Elkin, saying, "The 3 behind you as well, right?" This statement made Raven furrow his brows. The brown-haired man continued to sit confidently in the chair opposite them, saying, "Then allow me to test you a little. I will assign you the task of hunting monsters." The brown-haired man continued, "At the border of the territory I currently govern in the village of Mancha." Hearing this made Raven widen his eyes in horror. He panicked and thought, "Mancha, he's talking about," without noticing that Elkin and White Dragon had picked up on his strange behavior. He gritted his teeth, thinking, "In the village of Mancha, is it? That village is." Looking back at the past with terraced fields and farmers, he thought that his homeland was the land that the Vault family once ruled. The scene shifted, and at that moment, thousands of monsters charged forward. Jody delivered a blow to the head of a wolf. Skilla sliced through an eagle. Gus cut the throat of a snake with his bare hands, causing the soldiers nearby to stare in astonishment. At this moment, something appeared. It was Elkin's sword as he faced a fierce wild boar. He swung the sword, landing a strike. The sword pierced the boar's snout. This sight left the 2 soldiers on horseback dumbfounded, eyes wide and mouths agape. After defeating the boar, a much fiercer bear appeared behind Elkin. The bear bared its teeth, and he reacted by tilting its head back to look at it. Immediately, Raven pierced one of the bear's eyes with a sword. Then Raven jumped off the bear. He wielded his sword and charged forward. This time, he swung decisively, lopping off the bear's head. The soldiers sitting on their horses were even more astonished by Elkin's display of skill than they were by Raven's fight. Brilliant streaks of light and pieces of flesh surrounded a pair of blue eyes. White Dragon stood in the center, looking at the pieces of flesh and the monsters surrounding him. White Dragon was expressionless, still cold, ignoring the blood flowing down his face. The 2 soldiers on horseback were sweating in fear at the sight of White Dragon and dared not say a word. Upon reaching their destination, they gathered to sit at tea house. Below them were the laboring people. Scylla cheerfully laughed and exclaimed, "Do you see that? The expressions on those knights' faces?" After the group sat down to eat, Scylla continued to speak joyfully. Seeing our strength, their faces turned pale, and they didn't dare say a word. Jody chimed in, "Well, mainly it was about those 3, or rather about Saul." Gus commended, "Anyway, it's certain that we've been accepted." Joey, hearing this, added, "It's lucky that we're on the same team, Raven." Raven turned around at that. Seeing that Raven seemed unhappy, Jody asked, "What's wrong, Raven? You don't look very happy." Raven replied, "No, I'm just really worried about the villagers over there." Seeing the farmers working tirelessly below, Raven wondered, "Are they really that poor?" "Currently, the farmers of this village," Jody then said, "but they are not really farmers." Jody's statement surprised both Raven and Elkin. Jody continued, "They have no assets, no freedom, they are serfs, they are slaves." As Jody finished speaking, Raven was startled, eyes wide open, and exclaimed, "What?" White Dragon and Elkin were also surprised, unsure of what to say. Gus added, "Right now, most Sisk are in this situation." Gus continued, "When that stupid Brescia bought this country, he invested most of his assets into it. To recoup that money, he imposed heavy taxation on the villagers." Gus pointed at the farmers and said, "But that still wasn't enough, and in the end, he established a serfdom system." Looking at the emaciated, weak, and exhausted farmers, Gus said, "That day, everything that belonged to them, except for food, was taken away. They are just exploited slaves." Gus took a sip of water and concluded, "Because the damn pig has become rich, yet still greedy." At that moment, Scylla beside him nudged and reminded, "Hey, don't speak so loudly. What if the knights hear you?" Gus didn't care, his face emotionless, replied, "Those great knights won't come to this garbage dump." Raven and Elkin standing next to him were at a loss for words, with Raven showing a hint of anger. Elkin then remarked, "That garbage bastard." Raven gritted his teeth in anger, his fist clenched and shaking slightly, thinking, "This has never happened before, at least not in this village." Recalling a scene, a young man in a shirt slayed a wolf to protect a mother and her child who were hugging each other, Raven thought, when father was still around. After it ended, the man extended his hand to support the woman who was holding a small child. He continued to think when the vault family was here. An image of a happy family appeared with the father smiling at his son and wife. The father even patted the boy's head. Back to the present, Raven was still lost in thought. Elkin looked up at the sky, seeing dark clouds approaching. Perhaps it was about to rain. Sure enough, Scylla stood next to Gus with his hand out saying, "Oh, it's raining." At this moment, Raven stood up under Jody's puzzled gaze. Raven left, causing Jody to call out in confusion, Hey, where are you going, Raven? It's raining." Raven stood in the rain, not lifting his head, and said, "Leave me alone for a moment." White Dragon and Elkin stood in the rain, still a bit confused. The rain gradually increased, the sound of the rain grew louder, and the raindrops became heavier. Raven stood in the rain. In front of him was a dilapidated house. His face showed a saddened expression as he looked at the ruins. He glanced at the flag featuring 2 swords and a hawk. The scenery was desolate, with the rain pouring heavily. A familiar figure stood silently, gazing at the sea in front of him, deep in thought. He stood there alone, quietly, his sad eyes staring blankly at the ground. On the ground lay scattered stones and a family flag. The background was green, with an eagle stretching its wings in the center, and behind the eagle were 2 swords crossed over each other, but now it had been partially burned. As he was lost in memories, someone quietly approached from behind, surprising him and making his eyes widen. It was none other than Sol, a companion of his. She had just come up behind him and was taking off her hood. She looked at him from behind and asked, "So this is the Vault family, where you grew up?" He snapped out of his reverie and turned to answer her. "Sol, I told you to leave me alone for a bit." His tone held a hint of irritation. She replied softly, "I worry about you." Hearing her words, he said nothing, just looked at her, regardless of the relentless rain pouring down on him. Seeing him silent and not responding, she began to speak. "Ever since we arrived in Siskuk, you have been acting very strangely." He continued to remain silent. Seeing this, she asked further, "Are we the soul-linked covenant, or am I mistaken?" It seems she had partially guessed his intentions for being here, so he remained silent, not saying anything more. Then he turned away, not looking at her anymore. She followed his gaze, and he was looking at the 3 tombstones on the ground. She stepped closer to him, her tone somewhat bitter, asking him, "Are those the graves of your family members?" He pointed, made a sound of acknowledgement, looking at the tombstones that were no longer intact. He remained silent for a while before introducing each one. "My father, Grey Vault, my brother, Reed Vault, and my mother, Shina." After finishing the introduction, he added, "But since the Vault family members were accused of treason, there's no way Tylene or the Brescia clan would have built these graves." He added, "Which monster?" Before he could finish his sentence, someone from afar interrupted him. The other person asked, "You too, who is she?" This desolate place made that voice attract the attention of both. Before them now stood an old man with unkempt hair and beard, wearing tattered, quite dirty clothes, with a pair of round glasses that had one side broken. The old man continued to stare at them intently, not taking his eyes off. The young man looked at the person in front of him, assessing and then wondering to himself, a commoner perhaps. It took him a long while of looking at the man before he was astonished to realize, no, this person is. The memories from his childhood rushed back, and the image of the steward gradually became clearer in his mind, back when his parents were still alive. He remembered how the steward served tea in a cup for him beside his mother. It dawned on him now, the steward of the Vault family, Mr. Remelda. The old man walked over to him, asking as he approached with a bitter tone, "Have you come to laugh at the graves of the traitors of the Vault family?" His question rendered both him and the young woman speechless. He bowed his head sadly and added, "I have served them for a very long time. Even now, my master has never changed." With that, he fell silent. The young man, hearing those words, remained silent as well, standing there with him. After a long moment, he gritted his teeth and spoke slowly. "I have heard that the head of the Vault family, Grey Vault, is a proud warrior who always protects his people." He steadfastly added, "We don't believe they are conspiring. There must have been some misunderstanding." Those words left him astonished, with a touch of joy in his heart. He lowered his gaze, and 2 streams of tears flowed, mingling with the cold rain. He choked out, "Is that so? Thank you." He looked at him, smiled, his eyes shimmering with compassion. Suddenly, he pointed toward the graves and asked, "Did you establish those graves?" He softly replied, "Yes, I wanted to send them off properly." He bitterly smiled and said, "They were all wonderful people." He stood before 3 tombstones and said, "Lord Grey always said that there should be no distinction between a lord and his subjects, and the only difference between them should be their roles." He also mentioned, "His son Reed follows in his father's footsteps. He is a brave warrior. I have seen him risk his life countless times to protect the villagers from monsters." Then he added about his mother and his wife, Shino, who provided food for the villagers whenever the harvest failed. She even helped the remaining villagers plow the fields. Hearing those words about his family brought him a bit of joy. He smiled gently at the tombstones. But it didn't stop there, he added. The three of them are wonderful characters, but things have changed. Hearing those words, he changed color. He stared at him, unable to believe it. He could notice the expression on his face slowly changing as he continued. When their son, Reed, arrived at the Brescia family and sent them a letter. When he heard about the letter, he was taken aback and looked at him, speechless. He quickly interrupted him. Wait, the one who delivered the letter to them was a Graven Vault, was it? Hearing that question, he turned back to look at him. He looked at him confused and asked, Raven Vault? Who is he? His response shocked him to the core. His eyes widened in disbelief. Then he grabbed one of his shoulders and shouted, the second son of the Vault family, Raven Vault. There's no way you don't know him. Suddenly being yelled at like that made him angry as well, and he shouted back, what are you talking about? The Vault family doesn't have a second son. Then he named each member of the Vault family Gray, Reed, and Shino. Their family only has 3 people. He then shouted loudly back at him, why do you say such things? Those words left him speechless. He trembled all over thinking, so Raven Vault does not exist. A great line of thought appeared in this world. He trembled even more violently, causing her to look over in surprise. He widened his eyes, recalling each event when his family's house was burned down, and he could only watch helplessly. He reminded himself, so the restoration of the Vault family. If no one survived, then all my struggles, all those times I had to fight monsters at the risk of my life. He thought about his own purposes. He wondered, what am I after all? He held his head, slumped down, tears mixed with the rain, sobbing. Seeing this, she hurried over, reaching out towards him, shouting, Gray. He, unable to believe it, dropped his knees, yelling, ah. His body continued to tremble violently. She sat beside him, gently placing her hand on his back, comforting and reassuring him. While she sat there comforting him, he quietly walked away, turning to check on the situation between him and her. Nearby, after he had left, a person was hiding behind a large wall observing. The figure was stunned upon hearing this information, their eyes filled with disbelief as they looked towards her and him. At that moment, he embraced her. He choked on his tears, unable to speak. Then he shouted loudly, why me? And cried, sobbing like a child. She sat there, only able to pat his back, comforting him. The scene changed to another place where the rain continued to fall incessantly, the vegetation overgrown. Inside the stately carriage, there were 3 people accompanying for protection. The person inside shouted loudly, their voice filled with irritation. Those reckless mercenaries, I will definitely not spare them. She bit her finger tightly, her expression angry and somewhat fierce, cursing inside the carriage. I will gouge out their eyes and make them crawl on the ground like dogs. Afterwards, I will force them to work as slaves until they die. The soldier next to her reminded her, Miss Sophia, you are speaking too loudly. This reminder made her even angrier, and she spoke even louder. I am of royal blood. I am the daughter of a count. Do they think I will forgive what they did in Sistek? The more she spoke, the more aggressive she became, showing no respect for anyone. My father will agree to whatever I ask. Her words were heard in full by a figure standing on the edge of a cliff. He bared his pearly white teeth with a bushy beard and laughed. Ha ha ha. It seems I have found 2 fools I can exploit. When they arrived at Miss Sophia's mansion, demons suddenly surged from all directions. The guards shouted loudly, the demons are coming. The so-called demons were actually animals marked with a seal on their foreheads. 2 fierce wolves and an eagle rushed toward them. One guard charged forward, swinging his sword to kill one demon with a clean cut to its head. After dealing with that one, another charged directly at him. There was also another demon on the guard's head. At this moment, the guard was desperately trying to eliminate the 2 in front of him. Startled, he glanced back and discovered that the demon he had just killed had resurrected and was coming at him again. Although it was a bit surprising, thanks to his quick reflexes, he swung his sword and struck it cleanly between the eyes, ending its life. The servants, seeing this, exclaimed loudly in praise. He has done it. It is indeed Sir Fillmore, one of the finest knights of Sistek. Fillmore broke out in a cold sweat as he looked at the monster. What the hell is this? He thought to himself. Just moments ago, even after I severed its head, it still didn't stop. The monster, which he had just beheaded, was still growling, causing Fillmore to worry. The blood pouring from the creature was terrifying, rumbling loudly. The magic on its forehead glowed with a purple light as it reconnected with the other half of its body. Not allowing it to reconnect, Fillmore stomped down on its head. After dealing with it, he began to move inside. The servants respectfully said, "It is a great honor to have the chief knight and the young lady visit." Fillmore slowly walked to the entrance. Upon entering, he spoke. "Miss Sophia, I have dealt with them." But what struck him in the eye left him astonished. Balshan smiled, his gaze cunning. "How are you?" brave warrior of Sisek, Chief Knight Fillmore. In his hands now was the young lady Sophia, whom Knight Fillmore had been fiercely protecting. Balshan noticed she was a bit too loud, so he raised his voice and asked, "Can you be quiet for a moment?" Just that gentle remark made her tremble, her eyes welling up as she looked at the man, only daring to mumble a few sounds. He held the axe close to Sophia's neck, threatening, "If not, her head will be chopped off." On the ground in the house, there were bodies lying all over the room, all heads severed. The image of the knights, considered the strongest, lay dead in heaps, their heads and bodies incomplete, creating a truly devastating scene. Seeing that sight, Fillmore felt anxious. He thought, God evaluates that all 3 specially selected guards have been slaughtered without making a sound. Lady Sophia has. That man wondered to himself, who is this guy? Thinking, Fillmore cautiously asked, "What do you want? Money?" He chuckled softly. "It's all for a grand plan. I won't reveal anything further." As he spoke, he brought the axe closer to Sophia's neck, making her tremble even more. Furthermore, he added, "A small bug like you doesn't need to know about it." That statement left Fillmore stunned in place. He smiled and added, "Anyway, since I can take advantage of you and that foolish Brescia, I will be able to catch the one I want without any effort." As the axe drew closer, she could only shut her eyes tightly, tears streaming down her face. In that situation, Fillmore felt a jolt of fear. In that moment, Fillmore spoke softly, "I don't care what happens to me, just let Miss Sophia go." Hearing those words, the man laughed mockingly. "You really are sharp-tongued. Well then." He paused for a moment as if lost in thought. After a moment, he pointed to Fillmore's eyes and said with a smirk, "Both of your eyes, take them out for me." Upon hearing that, the knight broke into a cold sweat. Seeing the person in front of him hesitate, the man added, "If you don't do it quickly." As he spoke, his large hand squeezed the small face below, causing her to tremble terribly. Then he squeezed her nose hard, making her open her eyes wide in fear. When he released her, tears were streaming down her face, and she looked utterly in pain. He said with a grin, "I will take them." She, in pain and fear, could only let out a few muffled sounds. Seeing his abrupt actions, the knight was utterly terrified. He continued, "It's from this wretched girl." Saying this, his hand slowly moved towards her eyes, then pressed down hard under her eyes, causing her to cry in fear. Suddenly, blood splattered from somewhere. The knight let out an "eh." The blood and that painful sound surprised him. In his hand now were 2 of his own eyeballs. The man's eyes were completely blind now, but he suppressed the pain and said, "Is this enough?" He released Sophia and laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha, so you are this loyal. Is this the knight's oath? How interesting." Stopping his laughter, he mocked, however, "You are a fool." As soon as he finished speaking, Sophia's head flew up into the air. The man, now blind, was completely unaware. Blood splattered everywhere. The smell of blood spread in the air. In his hand now was the head of the person he had protected with all his heart. Fillmore let out a long scream filled with resentment. Then he charged at the man with his sword. Not giving the man a chance to counter, he grabbed an axe and swung it, Fillmore's head flying far away. He looked at the 2 corpses, chuckling, and said, "There's no way you could defeat me without eyes, you barbarian." Then he looked at Sophia's head and mocked the other guy. "You are truly a fool to listen to this useless wretch." As he spoke, he took out a purple-tipped staff with a seal resembling the seal on the heads of the demons. The staff slowly emitted a purple light. Beneath the 2 corpses he had just killed, a circle of purple seals appeared. Blood gradually floated into the air. The severed heads slowly sought their bodies, gradually reconnecting. The chopped-up corpses gradually stood up. After a moment, the 2 corpses were completely resurrected. He looked at his creation and smiled with satisfaction. He laughed and said, "From now on, you are my puppets." The 2 who had just been resurrected grew 2 fangs. One knelt before the other, and they both said in unison, "We all obey your wishes." On the back of their necks were seals resembling those of the demons. Then together they said, "Master Tovin Baltai." In another place in an inn, someone asked, "Hey, what happened to Raven?" Jody spoke up. "Since that rainy day, he hasn't left the room for a moment. Say something to us, Elkin." Elkin simply stared at him in silence, saying nothing. The girl sitting next to him also remained silent while he lowered his head, looking extremely exhausted. In a palace, Regia's voice echoed, asking, "So how powerful are those 6 mercenaries?" The subordinate politely bowed his head and cautiously replied, "They are all top-tier mercenaries, but there is a slight problem." Regia was puzzled. Cut to Raven, who was tossing and turning while Saul brought in food. Seeing this, she felt worry, subconsciously calling his name, Ray. Then she looked at the food on the table and continued to think, "At least you have to eat a little." She stood there silently, watching him sadly. Suddenly, he spoke, "Ravenvault does not exist here, and the Vault family is gone." Sol looked at him with a sorrowful expression. Then his body began to tremble as he bitterly asked, "So what the hell am I? Why do I live?" He still hung his head and continued, "Tell me, Sol stared at him with wide eyes, but then she felt disappointed and dejected, unable to think of anything. In the rainy night, her thoughts emerged, "I'm sorry, Ray." The scene shifts to a magnificent castle, adorned with rings and sparkling gemstones on his fingers. A loud ha erupted from the chubby face. He sat in his chair, dejected, and said, "Recently, Sophia's gaze has been very cold." He was Lord Sisip and also Count Brescia. Two knights standing below, upon hearing this, flattered him. "That's not true, my lord." He replied, "Is that so?" Suddenly, his spirit returned and he exclaimed, "That's right. Let's give Sophia another gemstone, one so expensive that it could become part of the royal treasure, Mithril." He was very excited about his plan. His expression suddenly darkened and he added, "For this reason, we must raise the taxes." His subordinates heard this and said, "My lord," about that. But he raised his voice and declared, "Those who do not pay will be turned into serfs. They will reap what they sow." And then he could confidently assert that Love Tylene, the most important vassal of our family, would also support this new policy. The subordinate could only stand there, unable to say anything and looking at him with a helpless gaze, unable to salvage the situation. Meanwhile, another guard rushed in, shouting in panic, "My lord." He said that Miss Sophia and Sir Fillmore had returned. This news brought him immense joy. He was so happy that he dashed forward, falling flat on his face while still calling Sophia's name soft. A black hat adorned with a few purple feathers made him widen his eyes in surprise. A slender, alluring back was partially exposed, and the fiery hourglass figure was accentuated by a fitted top of her dress. A woman and a man entered. She said, "Hello, dear father." Filmer said, "We are back," but his eyes were filled with darkness. The twisted lord looked at Sophia with a greedy gaze. Then he began to tremble. Oh, in admiration. He carefully thought, "What is happening? They are behaving differently than usual." Filmer stated, "My lord, a troubling issue has arisen. This is an important matter, so I hope you will allow the others to step outside." Then all the Imperial guards were dismissed outside. He asked, "So what? What happened?" Filmer replied, "To put it simply, one of Elma's lords, Love Tylene, is planning a rebellion." Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but exclaim, "What? What's going on?" as if he found it hard to believe. Filmer continued, "They tried to take Lady Sophia hostage, and we were also attacked while on the mountain. Recently, they have recruited a large number of mercenaries. It would be better if we strike first, otherwise things will get very messy." Lord Sisik hesitated, sweating this. He is my closest vassal. His voice trembled, as if filled with fear and disbelief. He thought, "However, Fillmore is one of the strongest warriors of Sisik and my most loyal subordinate. There's no way he would report incorrectly." At that moment, Fillmore presented a bag with a slightly blood-soaked bottom. A head fell before him. Then several more heads dropped as well. The sight horrified him, causing him to scream, "Eek! These three have been assassinated by Love Tylene's killers. I managed to save the lady, but she has also been tied up by them." Sophia slowly stepped forward and grabbed one of his hands, feeling humiliated. On her arm, there were 2 marks from being tied up. Seeing this, the lord was shocked and stunned. Suddenly, Sophia jumped up and hugged him tightly, saying, "Father." Then she continued with a pleading look, "Please find a way to protect me." This left him at a loss for how to react. His face flushed, trembling, unable to resist the temptation. Looking at Sophia with tears in her eyes, he said, "My daughter, I will surely protect you." It was for this reason that he decided to go to war, declaring, "Our enemy belongs to the Tylene family, to protect our honor and to protect Sophia." But Sophia looked at him with a wicked gaze and a smile, along with Fillmore. He seemed to lose all reason and shouted loudly, "All troops advance." The subordinates also raised their hands to indicate their compliance. Sophia, with a scheming expression, said, "Father, you are truly the best father in the world. I love you." He laughed with delight. The scene shifts to a figure in horn armor talking to himself. "Ha ha ha. It's my fault. Thanks to you, the evidence will be destroyed, Rove Tylen." The setting changes to a patch of tangled weeds and dense foliage. The weather is ominously overcast and a piercing scream resonates. At this moment, Jody and a young man with green hair and a fringe covering most of his eyes stand there, feeling confused and startled by the loud sound. The young man with the fringe exclaims, "Damn it!" Jody cannot keep quiet either. A monster is clutching Scylla, who screams in pain. What the hell is this? As it tightens its grip around her. It turns out this is a snake spirit with a long tongue wrapping around Scylla and a massive body, causing Jody and the young man with the fringe below to feel terrified. Then the snake spirit begins to grow aggressively furious, using its long tongue to launch a fierce attack on Scylla. To save Scylla, Jody and the young man with the fringe come up with the idea of striking the monster's tongue. It seems simple, but everything proves to be extremely difficult. The young man with the fringe complains. Soon, all three are captured, suspended in the air by the long tongue wrapping around each of them. The faces of all three are filled with fear as the snake spirit overwhelms them, while only the snake spirit shows excitement at these delicious, plump morsels. All three shout in desperation, "Damn it!" At that moment, Scylla's face was filled with utter fear, not knowing how to escape. The tongue of the serpent was gradually retracting to bring the prey into its mouth. Suddenly, a nimble figure appeared running forward, with a scar on his left hand, swiftly drawing the sword that was at his side. It turned out that the agile person was Elkin. With a cold, expressionless face, he took the sword and swiftly chopped off the serpent's tongue, leaving the young man in disbelief along with Jody at Elkin's quick rescue. After severing the serpent's tongue, Elkin's face remained unfazed. Nearby, someone shouted his name, Elkin. He leaped into the air to confront the serpent, holding two swords ready for battle. In front of Elkin was the serpent's mouth wide open, along with its long, writhing tongues that he had just severed. He slowly advanced straight toward the serpent's mouth. Wherever he went, he swung his sword, cutting off each of the serpent's tongues, causing them to gradually shorten. The black drops of blood inside the tongue also spilled out, splattering everywhere. The scene shifts to Duke Pendragon. There are four people: Elkin, Jody, a young man with a diagonal hairstyle, and Stala, gathered at a tavern by the rice field. Behind them is a hill with stairs leading down to the tavern. Above them are tall buildings constructed in an old-fashioned style, looking very luxurious. The three of them, having escaped danger thanks to Elkin, were sitting discussing the fight against the serpent spirit. One of them, Jody, said, "You really saved our lives back there, Elkin." Jody looked at Elkin, who was eating happily, then reached out his hand towards Elkin and said, "You are truly a valiant knight of Valvis. You are on a completely different level." Scylla next to him was also holding a glass of water, smiling at Elkin, while the young man with the diagonal hairstyle was happily enjoying his delicious drink. Scylla burst out laughing. "One day I really want to go to Valvis with you." Ignoring Scylla's words, Elkin, with a cold expression, continued to eat deliciously. Nom nom. Suddenly, his eyes became sad and thoughtful. He was eating while contemplating something. A bowl of rice is illuminated by the light, the shining grains of rice alongside pieces of mushrooms and crab sticks. The rice spoon is still scooping, not yet eaten, left right beside the bowl of rice. The scene shifts to a rice field with golden ripe grains. In the distance, far behind, are the mountains surrounded by a line of green trees. The scenery looks serene and beautiful. In an instant, that beautiful rice field has become a place of death. Surrounding it are dismembered corpses, along with figures dressed in identical black outfits, their faces covered. Each of them holds different types of weapons. They seem to have only one target, the man in the green-trimmed cloak fighting against them. Not only are there figures in those outfits on the ground, but also in the sky, sitting on the backs of large eagles, slowly advancing toward the man in the green cloak. Surrounding this bloody battle are flames raging throughout the rice field. After a period of fierce fighting, it seems the battle has come to an end. On the ground, only the fallen evil feathers and two swords wrapped in fresh blood remain. The ground still glimmers with the light of the blazing fire from earlier. The man in the green-trimmed cloak seemed to have lost the strength to stand up. He had single-handedly fought against those masked men, surrounded by dead bodies alongside the corpse of an eagle lying next to him. His face was soaked with blood after this brutal battle. Elkin, his eyes wide open and his face blank, stared at the scene around him in disbelief. His face was covered in scratches and dirt, with drops of blood slowly dripping down. At that moment, dark, strange liquid flowed from his eyes. The even sides of his eyes reflected the image of raging flames. Returning to reality, Elkin was eating rice while contemplatively saying, "It's all the same." He continued to muse, whether it's in Valvis or here. His words left Scylla and the diagonal-haired young man confused about what he meant. At this moment, the diagonal-haired young man leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, turned to look at Jody, who was drinking water, and said, "I'm really surprised that we encountered that monster." Jody, calmly drinking water, replied, "If we had been even a moment slower, we would have been done for." Jody finished her drink and put the glass down, closed her eyes, and sighed. "If we could officially become warriors for a certain clan, life would be much easier." Then Jody began to explain, like the most talked about topic right now, the Pendragon clan, for example. Elkin, who was eating rice, suddenly perked up when he heard Jody and nearly choked on his food. He quickly covered his mouth with his hand to avoid spitting rice out in reaction to their shocking statements. Stella, hearing this, eagerly replied, "Oh, you mean the hero of Luce? He defeated all the pirate orcs that attacked the governor of Segunda's estate." Ignoring Elkin, who was trembling and sweating while watching the three of them, Jody leaned forward and said, "I've heard they treat their soldiers very well there." Scylla beside her then clasped her hands together, her eyes shining brightly as she said, "I've also heard that the Duke is very handsome." The guy next to them, leaning on his chin, said, "She's acting like that again, damn it." At that moment, Jody turned to Elkin and asked, "Elkin, what do you think?" Elkin was still trembling and couldn't find the words to speak. Suddenly, the four of them fell silent, looking at the diagonal guy with his arms crossed as he said, "I have no intention of becoming someone's dog." The diagonal guy lifted his chin to look at the people around him and continued, "Don't you see how pathetic Sisek is? The nobles and lords in the territory have no ability other than to exploit the citizens, a bunch of worthless scum." As he spoke, the diagonal guy picked up a glass of water and took another sip. "I would rather go back to being a bandit than work for someone like that." Just as he finished speaking, Scylla turned to look at Elkin, their eyes meeting. Scylla pointed at the diagonal guy and said to Elkin, "You see, you used to be a bandit." Jody, who was next to them, spoke up, "But the rulers of that territory are the Velt family, right? It didn't seem to be like this before." Upon hearing Jody's words, Elkin was taken aback by that statement. Encouraged by the moment, Jody continued, "I have heard they opposed the serfdom of Love Tylene and the Brescia clan. I also heard that the Lord personally led his troops to fight against monsters and protect his people, and that he was a warrior of great honor." The man with the diagonal hat rested his chin in thought. Scylla raised the glass of water to her lips, prepared to drink, then paused to say, "But aren't the people of Love Tylene saying that the Velt family is a group of traitors?" Jody drank some water and addressed Scylla's question. "I don't know the details of why they were labeled traitors. I only know that after that incident, their reputation was tarnished, but in Manza village, there are still many who say they are wise and benevolent lords." Elkin looked at the spoonful of rice he had just scooped up, lost in thought, and quietly said, "A warrior full of honor." The scene shifts to reveal a young man with long golden hair, dressed in a white cloak with golden trim, holding a white gold sword, riding majestically forward. At this moment, Elkin's gaze seemed to have just come up with an idea. The sound of galloping hooves suddenly stopped. From a distance, near where the four were gathered to eat and discuss, a young man on horseback shouted loudly, "Hey, mercenaries, listen up." His loud voice made the four turn to see what was happening. Taking advantage of his position, the horseman continued to shout, "Gather immediately at the Love Tylene estate. The stupid Brescias are advancing this way." All four people listened, their expressions quite surprised but still maintaining their composure. The Brescia army was slowly advancing towards the mansion under the torrential rain. Leading the way were two flag bearers on horseback, followed by soldiers in line. The flag of the Brescia army depicted a golden horse standing up with a green background and a golden border surrounding it. Inside the mansion, Elkin was running very fast. He banged on the door violently, causing it to open. He suddenly froze, coming to his senses when he saw two people sitting inside. On the left was a man in a black cloak with long black hair looking weary. On the right was a man in white with long white hair, who also seemed startled to see Elkin burst into the room. Elkin's face was drenched from running in the rain. Raindrops fell from his face onto the ground. He pulled back his hood and struggled to say, "Pendragon, it's time to mobilize." The man in the black cloak bowed his head, solemnly asking, "Is it Love Tylene's order?" He then told Elkin that his soldiers had just reported that if they did not take action, he would be killed. Their investigation into the assassination plot against Prince Sion would become futile. Elkin stood there, dazed, listening to the man in the black coat speak. He could no longer stand the man in the black coat's answer and shouted, "So we have to." The man in the black coat replied, "Why?" Elkin suddenly became indifferent and started to think. The man in the black coat covered his face with his hands and blamed himself. "I am neither Pendragon nor Raven, so what does that have to do with me?" The man in the black coat began to refuse responsibility for himself. "What is the purpose of this battle?" the man in the black coat said. Elkin stood next to him, looking at the man in the black coat, unsure of what to do. The man in the black coat, feeling helpless, said, "I have." Sol, sitting beside him, looked at the man in the black coat who felt dejected, unable to say anything to comfort him. The man in the black coat, despairing, continued, "There is no reason left." He kept covering his face, not wanting to show his sad expression to others to heat fighting. Something rushed by quickly. Elkin, with rain on his face, punched the man in the black coat in the face to jolt him awake. Sol stood beside them, also surprised by Elkin's actions. The man in black fell to the ground, crumpling. Elkin grabbed the collar of the man in black and said, "You." The man in black looked up at Elkin. "But I have decided to follow Eren Pendragon." Elkin leaned down, bringing his face close to that of the man in black, continuously gripping his collar while scolding him. As he held onto his collar, Elkin exclaimed, "Is that all you are? Just a weakling?" The man in black, with a dazed face and some streaks of blood, began to ponder Elkin's earlier words. He stammered, Isla." Elkin Isla delivered a painful punch right to Eren Pendragon's cheek, hard enough to draw blood. White Dragon, watching beside them, was astonished by the sudden turn of events. Eren Pendragon was knocked off balance, falling backward, his bat hitting the window ledge. Elkin Isla did not relent. He gripped the collar, forcing Eren to look up. Elkin's voice, filled with anger, rang out, "You." Elkin knelt down, bending over to clearly communicate to Eren, "But I have decided to follow Eren Pendragon." His face was full of fury as he shouted, "Is that all you are? Just a weakling?" Eren Pendragon, taken back by the question, stammered, Isla." Elkin Isla released his grip on Eren's collar, stood up, and continued, "You usually don't act like this. Since we arrived in Sisek, I felt it." Eren said nothing, his eyes wide with astonishment as he looked at Elkin. Elkin stepped back a bit, his words sharp enough to silence Eren. "There has always been something troubling you since we got here." That Elkin's next words startled Eren. "I've thought a lot about that too. This damn Sisek and my homeland." Outside the window, the rain fell incessantly, and the sky was gray. Elkin Asla's voice echoed in the room. Valva's really is very similar. For the first time, Elkin spoke about his homeland. He lowered his head and said, "Valbus is a territory consisting of a chaotic tangle of lands overlapping each other. As such, it is a place filled only with endless wars. And due to the insatiable greed and the conservatism of the lords in the territories, countless people and soldiers have had to sacrifice, just like the current Sisek. The more enemies we kill, one after another, the less we find a reason to fight, and in the end, we leave." Elkin's hand gripped one of his two swords, his grip tightening, saying, "I lost my will to live in the name of Valvas Knight." Then Elkin Isla raised his face to look at the young man sitting and said, "Until I met you, Pendragon." Eren Pendragon looked on in astonishment. Elkin's voice came steadily. "Just as you said after our battle, I am your sword, and you are my master." At that moment, when Elkin knelt before Eren in submission, he said, "But that doesn't mean we are not equals." Eren also knelt before Elkin. His face smiled and said, "It is just that our roles are different." Elkin vividly remembered those words. Back in the present, Elkin said, waiting to the point that we must be convinced, and then saying words like that afterward. "You are the first one to do so." Then Elkin Isla took his sword, leaned it against the ground, knelt down in front of Eren Pendragon, and said, "That is why I, Elkin Isla, vowed to become your sword." Looking at Elkin's serious face and Eren's astonished expression, a complete contrast to the past. But then Eren turned his gaze away and said, "Even so, it's okay." He closed his eyes, thinking of one thing only. The Valt clan and Raven Vault no longer exist. Elkin saw Eren's frustration, grasped his shoulder, and shouted, "Pendragon!" But he did not respond. Elkin pondered something. Then he grasped the collar of Eren's shirt and yelled a name that seemed no one called anymore, Raven. Indeed, Eren reacted. He turned to look at Elkin, his face full of astonishment. Elkin, with a cold expression, stared directly at him. Then his voice echoed. "On that rainy day, something happened that I do not know what it was. I do not know what your relationship is with the Valt family, but they are the only ones on this rotting land who protect their people. I have heard they are honorable warriors." Elkin frowned, recalling the scene of Eren riding to distract the Centaur army. Elkin Isla continued, "When you chose to fight alone against the Centaur army, I felt the same way." Elkin released his grip, no longer holding on to Eren's shirt. Despite Eren's wide-eyed stare, his pupils contracting as he looked at him. Elkin glanced behind. White Dragon was slowly approaching. He said, "So let me." Looking at White Dragon's face, Elkin continued his request, "Ride the Gryphon," which she granted me once again. Then Elkin fiercely grasped Eren's collar again, forcing him to look closely at his face. Elkin Isla shouted, emphasizing, "You are Eren Pendragon, and you have the power to change the world, even this decaying Sisek." Meanwhile, Eren was still contemplating Elkin's words. He bowed his head, thinking to himself, "That's right. Remembering his time in Raven's body, he had used a sword to behead a monster to protect the people. Even though the Velt clan was no more, their wishes still lived on. The moment he became Eren, he continued to accept danger to save a child." Eren's thoughts echoed within him, along with images of himself appearing and rescuing others. Then he took another step forward with the support of townspeople behind him, inspired by his courage. Returning to reality, Elkin asked, "How much longer do you intend to let your sword rot?" Then Elkin threw a punch aimed at awakening Eren, shouting, "I will not forgive you." A sound emerged and wisps of smoke floated around. White Dragon looked in that direction. His expression had shifted. Elkin was the same. Now his eyes were wide open looking ahead. Eren Pendragon had risen and used his hand to block Elkin's punch. Then laughter erupted. It was Eren who was laughing, his mouth curved upwards. Finally, Eren spoke. "You really," Eren said with a bright smile to Elkin. "You're not speaking like you usually do, Isla." Elkin saw the opponent's return and smiled in response. He tilted his head and replied, "You too. You look unusually haggard today, Pendragon." Eren laughed and said, "I don't want to hear you say that." Then he burst into laughter. White Dragon was confused, listening to his ha-ha-ha laughter. Afterward, Eren sat on the bed, extending his hand toward the loaf of bread. At the gaze of White Dragon, and with Elkin's satisfaction, Eren held the bread in his hand, calling out Soul, Armor Dragon. Hearing those words, White Dragon finally broke into a smile that visibly expressed his happiness. The next day, a sunny morning shone through the window. In front of the inn, 3 spies from the White Dragon Brigade were already present. Gus, crossing his arms, stood first. We're not participating. Raven is probably doing the same. After all, standing on the same side as Tylene is of no benefit. Jody, sitting across from him with her arms crossed, pondered and replied, he turned the lord of the territory into an enemy, so I must agree with this decision. The sound of metal-soled shoes striking the ground made all 3 look toward its source. A figure in a black cloak appeared and said, sorry to keep you waiting. Jody, hearing her name, exclaimed in surprise, Raven. The 3 stared in astonishment at the man standing before them. Raven, or Eren as he is now, was wearing black dragon armor, gazing at them imperiously with the demeanor of a leader. Behind him were Elkin and White Dragon. Then Eren commanded, let's go to Tylene's territory. Bring the horses here. With iron shoes on his feet, a sword in hand, and clad in armor, this was Eren. Jody, Gus, and Sella were astonished. They radiated an aura of rare intensity. Eren spoke. I kept you waiting. Jody's eyes widened in amazement. What? The atmosphere around him. He's a noble. Scylla marveled, much more than before. Gus was sweating, staring intently. During his time as a thief, he had seen countless high-quality items. However, he had never seen armor of this caliber. Is he really a mercenary? He calmly ordered, let's go to Tylene's territory. Bring the horses here. The 3 people gaped at his words. Joey anxiously exclaimed, what? Jody fiercely retorted, are you planning to team up with Tylene? Scylla was not convinced. Don't you know that Tylene has made enemies with the Lord? Gus chimed in, even if we participate, we won't gain anything. On the contrary, that rotting house will. He remained firm in his decision. Is that so? But right now, letting him die would be quite troublesome. Eren mounted his horse and declared loudly, this is my battle. I have no intention of dragging you into it. Take care, Jody, Gus, and Sella. With that, he spurred his horse away. Elkin also got on his horse. Jody, slightly doubtful, stammered, hey, are you serious, Elkin? Elkin calmly looked at him and turned away. I am his sword. Then he joined White Dragon to chase after Eren. The 3 of them stared blankly as each person rode away. Scylla gritted her teeth. Wait. Then she hurriedly chased after them. Wait a moment, Elkin Raven. Gus was extremely surprised. That red-haired girl has gone crazy. Jody sighed in exasperation. Well, it's true that after defeating that monster, we owe them. Then Jody decided to follow them. Moreover, Gus was once again astonished. Jody continued, I have a feeling that if we go our separate ways right now, we will definitely regret it. After that, he galloped after them. Everyone had left, leaving Gus standing helplessly watching. Then, unable to resist, he resigned himself to following. Damn it, let them all die, those idiots. Eren, Elkin, and White Dragon had also arrived. The battlefield was chaotic. The flames were growing larger and the people were frantically seeking refuge. Many were crying in despair at the fragile existence between life and death. Eren looked at this scene, his face clearly showing hatred as if he wanted to tear apart the mastermind. Elkin spoke up. What do you think of this conflict, Pendragon? Eren was silent for a moment before replying. Usually, Brescia wouldn't declare war so suddenly, and it seems that Tylene's soldiers are quite confused about this. It's highly likely that someone has intervened in this conflict, and that person wants to wipe out Tylene. His gaze was piercing as he thought. Perhaps it's someone behind the assassination attempt on Prince Cyan, Segunda, or someone of higher rank. Elkin, serious and gripping his sword tightly, was ready to draw it and join the battle when Eren warned him. Don't be reckless, don't kill the soldiers. They are surely just following their lord's orders. Elkin looked at him, then smiled proudly. They arrived in front of a mansion engulfed in flames. They were shocked to see the mansion had been stormed. We're too late, Eren said. No, they are still attacking. Moreover, the Tylene I know, Ruv Tylene, is not someone who sacrifices himself for honor, Elkin replied. Eren made a different plan. The 3 of us will split up to find him. The 3, Jody, Gus, and Stella, had also caught up to them. Hey, Elkin, Elkin. The 3 waved cheerfully. Eren looked and said, our numbers have increased. He laughed. Indeed, the Valva's cavalry. You gained their trust quickly. Elkin smiled in response. Eren led everyone towards the mansion. Let's go. Inside the mansion, chaos was unfolding. Soldiers were brutally slaughtering each other. Meanwhile, Eren rode like the wind, racing through the ever-expanding flames. The presence he exuded instilled fear in everyone who looked at him. Before them stood a castle engulfed in flames, illuminating the night sky. Soldiers wielding swords rode into the castle, shouting and slashing. Sophia's father, Count Brescia laughed maniacally, excitedly saying, "Look, Sophia." He sat in a chair, his left hand gripping a sword plunged into the ground, and his right arm wrapped around his daughter Sophia. Behind him were 4 knights lined up. He declared loudly, "This is the fate of those who dare to challenge you, that despicable love Tylene." Sophia, dressed in dark clothing, sat on her father's lap and cunningly said, "My father, my wise and brave one." She smiled maliciously. "I love you very much.